What does thou want?
Oh, oh, wouldst thou live deliciously? Absolutely, bloody yes. Oh my God,
A
wow.
pretty dress? Would thou like to live deliciously?
What was it? The taste.
Why,
What
are you
does he
feeling
say?
better? You sound better.
Oh, I feel a million times better than
Oh,
the
that's
last
great.
recording.
You
Yeah.
pushed through beautifully last time.
No, I was fine. It was just the it really was that super flu thing, I believe, and it was just lingering, you know. But I felt fine. It was just
Yeah, I mean, you were on top form.
congestion,
It
you
was
know.
just I knew you weren't in yourself
Yeah.
absolutely at.
I was, there was a little bit of sort of maintaining going on last time.
Oh.
A little bit of maintaining, but no, I feel absolutely fine.
So presumably you were killing children and rubbing their blood all around you just to feel better. And,
Yes,
you know,
well, but that's
good.
just par for the course at this house. You know, that's the way it happens.
Just average day at the mill.
Absolutely. That's Tuesday for me. But oh my God, I haven't seen The Witch for a long time, and I tell you, I was watching it last night to just refresh myself, and I was like, I had to pause it to catch my breath.
It's amazing, and this was my first viewing.
What? Really?
Yeah, it's been.
Oh.
It's been in that unfortunate pile of. I mean, I was really taken aback when I realised it was 2015, and that just goes to show how well it was probably 2016 by the time the DVD came out. I never saw it in the cinema. I've increasingly got sort of disenchanted with watching things in cinemas and in theatres because I just get fed up with the audiences.
It's very rare these days, I've got to say.
It's rather like we talked about in Blair Witch, the problem with the audience unwittingly contaminating your view of it with their response. But it was on the list, and I remember I was going to see it with a really dear friend of mine, Steph. We were going to watch it one night. Something happened, and I think it was one of those cases where I kept saying, well, I won't watch that because that's the film we were going to watch together.
Right, got you.
Then before I knew it's completely, gone. There were a couple of films like that. There was another film, Victoria was a film we were going to watch together, and then that was another movie that I took years to see because we just didn't get around to watching it, so never mind. But it was magnificent, so I was very pleased that my inaugural viewing was then going to lead to this because I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about it because you're more familiar with it than I am. I've had the one viewing. It blew my mind.
Yes.
I've scribbled as many notes as I could as a sort of aid to memory. But
I was watching it last night and it hit. I absolutely was blown away by it the first time I saw it, but this time round I was watching it and I was awed by it because, there's no such thing as a perfect created thing. But my God, for what it attempts to do, it's so controlled.
Just on a quite sort of superficial level, it had to have done its trick because although I had a certain trust in the two of you to not suggest anything that was going to be, below par.
Of course.
When it opened up, just in the first few scenes, I was probably a little bit arms folded and come on, you're going to have to impress me because there was just something about I am within about 10 minutes I'd sort of fallen in love with the aesthetic of it, but there was that bit at the beginning where I thought this is a very new film.
Yes.
I'm a little bit worried about its format, and I'm just a little bit worried about. It's a conversation that Jack and I have had in the past, and it's one of the things about it. having sort of come from an acting background,
of course,
there is a very strange thing which is sort of developed in what I would sort of call contemporary acting. I almost struggle to articulate it, but it's a sort of what I call understated ham.
Right,
which is over the years, the technology in film and television has, of course, become very so much more advanced, and
Right.
it's become so much more sensitive.
Mhm.
So when a camera is in on close up on you now, for instance, actors don't wear makeup anymore. It's all it is crystal clarity, and sound is really so. Consequently, there's almost been a kind of style that's developed around this, which is
Right.
a curious mix of a sort of Brechtian style of acting minus the content. They're more likely to be
Right.
selling you something than actually trying to.
Right.
But it's the kind of hyper realism.
Oh, I see. So there's like an almost like understatement, but an exaggerated
like
understatement.
So you get a lot of this kind of acting.
Yes.
Everything's
Yeah.
very low, and no one moves much because they're absolutely terrified.
Yeah. That it's going to be too big somehow. It's going to be like too exaggerated. Yeah.
Exactly, and of course it's a nonsense because there are, there are great understated moments and understated actors, but the medium still withstands big performances.
Yeah, of course it does.
But as long as something is rooted in truth,
Mm-hmm.
you can get away with so much. So I had this little bit of a worry at the beginning. So it's a modern film. It's got quite a crystal clear format on it. I don't know what they're shooting on, but actually one of the things that turned out to be great was they pulled the Barry Lyndon and shot a lot of it with that light and candlelight.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that, which really worked. And I was just in those early stages thinking, oh God, I hope this isn't going to be too much of a barrier for me.
Yes.
I was within about 4 minutes. I was like, oh no, this is not what I thought. This is great. In fact, it's amazingly how, and I mean this in the best possible sense, it was amazing how theatrical it was.
Yes.
It is a piece of theatre that as it's on a sort of fault line of the theatrical and the cinematic.
Well,
it's
its influences are principally theatrical. I mean, the obvious one is obviously Arthur Miller. I mean, like The Crucible is just it's a huge influence on this, absolutely enormous influence on this.
But also, I mean, you think of things like The Witch of Edmonton,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the sort of Jacobean plays,
of course,
Rowley and Thomas Dekker, John Ford, and things that it's all bubbling away in there. But it's very much in the writing. The fact that he spends time saying, "I'm just going to have people in rooms talking," and it's like, oh, this is bliss.
And the overwrought language, which is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh,
I was
my
reminded
God.
of things a bit. I was reminded of things like, although it's a different genre and it's a television thing, not a film, but I was reminded of things like Deadwood.
Yeah.
And everything where they just absolutely go with this stylized, very literary dialogue.
Right.
And that's it. You just have to go with it. But it's that thing we've come back to so many times with these films. It's truths within truths.
That's right. It's very similitude, isn't it? It's not. It's not like this isn't a documentary. It's not trying to be a documentary, but it creates its own reality. It creates its own set of assumptions and operates beautifully within them.
Yeah.
I mean, the part for me that got me is the prayer that is the most terrifying example of prayer in film, and also absolutely beautiful at the same time. Every time I get to that moment, I can't take my eyes off the screen, and yet it is horrifying me.
Yeah. It really one of the things I didn't do, perhaps I should, but then I think perhaps you're one, if not both of you, will know more about this than me. Because I noted that the screenplay was Eggers as well.
It was indeed.
And I thought, I wonder what your background is. I wonder what your did you come up through theatre? I mean, what is your what are your go-to things? Because he's.
I'll be honest, he's a bit of a mystery to me. I'm going to discuss this in the main podcast, but I don't really know a great deal about Eggers. I don't know, for example, how he works. In the same way that a lot of people know how Kubrick worked, because it's basically legendary at this point, or the way Ridley Scott works, or Dario Argento, or whatever. I have no idea. I mean, from the film itself and from the other films that he's made, I would assume that it's a case of absolute control. Because nothing is arbitrary. Absolutely.
Well, he seems
nothing.
to have a lot of areas covered, because apart from a director and a screenwriter, he was also a production designer.
Right.
So there is almost a kind of, I mean, I'm always wary of using the term auteur, but as much as it can be within, allowing for certain caveats, there is definitely a kind of. And it's funny you mentioned Kubrick, because there were times where, as I said, there was a sort of Barry Lyndon vibe about the aesthetic, which I was like, quite on board with.
I think the influence of certain directors is fairly clear here.
But and I just read somewhere that he's taking on apparently Nosferatu, which will be the 100th anniversary, won't it? Of the Manaus one.
I'm up for that. There are certain directors where if I heard they were having a go at that, I'd be, this is sacrilege, this is desecration, absolutely not, stay away, damn you. But
I mean, I love the Herzog one, but that came out of a particular set of circumstances, which were, no one knew where the original fucking was.
Yeah, right.
As far as I was concerned, in the early 70s,
it was gone.
Manaus Nosferatu did not exist.
Right.
And I mean, the original as an historical piece and as a piece of, I think, erroneously named German expressionism. Actually, I don't think it has many of the factors. It has one or two factors that you would link to. But it's actually in it's more like a fairy tale.
Yeah, it's a little too literary in a way, isn't it? The German expressionism.
Yeah. But the Herzog Nosferatu is. I mean, that's definitely my half a dozen favorite films of all time. So it's like, if you're going to take on Nosferatu, I'm going to be really interested on what come to it from.
Given here, have you seen The Lighthouse yet?
That is parked on my shelf. Again, something else. I'm a bit of a Johnny. I've got to be honest with you. I'm a bit of a Johnny come lately to most things. It used to be accident, rather like with The Lighthouse. Not The Lighthouse. The Witch. It's become a little. I've started to do it a bit on purpose now. Only it's because I almost like being a little bit behind the curve to see if things continue to have something outside their zeitgeist.
Yes, generally I'm the same, and the reason I do it, part of it is just complete it's contrarianism. If someone's saying see this, I'm like, no, I don't. I'll watch it when I want. I'll watch it when I'm ready. Part of it is simply because I try to avoid tainting my own perspectives of whatever it is. I want to see it unoccluded.
I completely agree with that. Funnily enough, just as an aside, I did finally catch up this afternoon with because I had a lovely day off today. I caught up on the Curse of the Blair Witch. So I watched that today. Because my copy finally came through the post, because I think I said to you, Jack had to upload it because it wasn't coming in time, and I didn't have a copy. So I saw that today.
And suddenly, I mean, it lends the film so much, doesn't it? There's so much context provided by that documentary. And the way I'm amazed by The Curse of the Blair Witch. When they aired that here and in the US, every channel bought into it. They got in on the act. They presented it not as a piece of documentary drama, but as a documentary.
Right.
Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
It's interesting, isn't it, how that was that brief period in the sort of late 90s, and it didn't. I mean, presumably because of things are expensive and there's only so much. But things were sort of based on hypercycles, so you didn't just get the film. You got a documentary around the film, and maybe there was a website.
There definitely was.
But that was almost like a moment in time, and. Sort of, I can't think of many contemporary examples of that.
It's more difficult to do now, of course, to create that kind of phenomena, simply because people are aware.
Our media,
they look
our
for
social media as well.
Yeah, it gets out, and suddenly
you get to know the vocabulary of something.
Right, everybody knows.
Quite quickly.
It has become its own thing. I mean, there are examples of this phenomena all over. It's very popular on YouTube, where there are. Video series that are uploaded as though they're from a legitimate YouTuber or creator, which turn out to be dramas. They turn out to be scripted, written dramas. using the medium of YouTube, and many of them are very good. Many of them are not, obviously, but many of them are very inventive because, of course, they are often just one person or a group of people with no money and very little in the way of equipment, creating something out of whole cloth. And it can be very impressive. There's an entire rabbit hole there.
Yeah, this is that point. I think I can't remember which movie we were dealing with. It may have been Blair Witch, where I said, if we're now in, if we've got these media that or that have existed 100 years in the case of film, obviously the novel form is several centuries now, but if you're going to, I always feel if you're going to do them when symbolically you've crossed the threshold into a new century, you've got to find a new way of doing them. And I think, although it might be the most obvious, that's not to denigrate it. The great thing about Midsummer, it's one of a sort of cluster of things. Their way of dealing with it is to become more interrogative of the form, of the genre, and to start asking the question, okay, if we're going to do them, why are we doing them?
Why? Yes.
And actually showing you the cross-section. It's actually showing you the process in some way where they, and I think The Witch does it in a subtle way.
It's that notion of
sort of
what does
this blueprint?
Yeah, what do these concerns and images and concepts mean to the postmodern person, or in postmodern culture? What are they expressing? What are we exploring via them? This is a consistent thing in Egger's work. It makes it existential. It makes it about identity ultimately. When you come right down to it, or in fact, I struggle to think of any of his films that doesn't do this, where it starts off with mythological concerns. And then it actually translates them into existential concerns. It turns them into concerns over identity, and they often come down on very, very ambiguous land, where and almost nihilistic land in a way, where it says, you know what, these cultures that are compromised, which are beholden to very dark traditions, they often provide something which postmodernity doesn't, in all their darkness and all their horror.
Yeah.
That's a really dark thing, isn't it? That's a really unpleasant thing to acknowledge. The notion that you might have more of a sense of place and purpose and poetry in one of these heavily prescriptive, archaic mythologies. There's something very, very grim about that. Well, I had a similar
sort of thing about, from the beginning, because I've been, because I'm a bit of a Shakespeare nerd, and I was thinking about this only recently in terms of, it's simultaneously estranging, but also at the same time, it brings you back into a sort of new focus with your own condition and the condition of the world you're in. Absolutely, as you've said. And I was thinking about Richard III, and saying, in a way, Richard III is sort of beyond morality. I mean, talking about good and evil with Richard III really almost doesn't make any sense.
It's almost meaningless, isn't it?
Yeah. What the exciting thing about Richard III, and as a play, as a piece of writing, and perhaps one of the reasons why Shakespeare is lasting in a way that many of the playwrights that came 100, even 200 years later have been forgotten by us, is this idea that, Richard III starts the play, absolutely the locus of control and a driving force. And as the play continues, it's almost like a downward spiral. And at the end, he is crushed by the same forces he got moving. He grows smaller during the play.
Yeah.
It's like the irony of, as he goes up towards kingship, the smaller he becomes. And by the end of it, there's going to be, Henry VII, who's just going to basically take over.
Yeah.
And but the heightened language, the telescoping of history, the very few backdrops, what seems like, how can we possibly relate to this now? And yet it actually shows in such concentrated form, to sort of run with something you said earlier, how history, and the history that is even happening around us, properly works. That naturalism cannot get near sometimes, because naturalism slips away from us, because you can't really see anything, because you're just cushioned by a natural everyday, and this is where I think you're absolutely right. And these kinds of movies from these kinds of looking at these kinds of points in history, somehow concentrate it down for us. You're reconfronted with it rather than it sort of slipping away from you.
Yeah, and it's a perennial concern. No, it does. It's a perennial concern, isn't it? Because it's fundamentally human. It transcends parameters of creed and culture and even century and time. Who we are and how we determine identity within the great engines of history and culture is always going to concern us until those engines are no more. Or until, I don't know, some other condition occurs as a result of, I don't know, technology or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it was probably what you were saying earlier as well about this thing about how myth intermingles. Because a lot of this did make me think back, and you said about, post-modernity and stuff, or postmodernity, of the sort of anthropology of Levi-Strauss, the idea of myth reiteration, of it, and creating a logic around these existential crises all the way through, but that obviously you can keep tracing back, and that's that idea of repetition, recycling. It's obviously very strongly in The Witch. It was very strongly in Blair Witch, very strongly in the Stone Tape.
Oh my goodness!
So
I mean, it almost becomes literal in the Stone Tape, doesn't it? They actually make it like a part of physical reality. That process.
It's strong implication in the others, and it is explicit.
Yeah, totally explicit.
In the Stone Tape.
But you've got it in The Witch too. I mean, you've got it here because there is that constant referring back to another time, another state, which is of course England in this instance. They're talking about wanting to go back to another condition, another state constantly. So what you're having is people whose identities have been subsumed and crushed by the weight of shifting history. Ultimately, and by the way in which we mythologize our circumstances, that's what I got from it more than anything. The way we mythologize tragedy, and in this instance, that phenomena becomes a source of madness. I mean, that made me every time I watch this film, it makes me really uncomfortable. That element of it, the fact that, I mean, I know we talked about how it is heightened and theatrical, and yet at the same time, with the style of shooting, it almost feels documentarian at times.
Well, I said it feels like it's on a fault line.
Yeah, it's really strange, isn't it?
In a way, if you take 3 steps back from it, it's how have you pulled this off? Because you are absolutely drawing on the artifice of certain images, be it Vermeer, Goya, and the like, and that comes from his production design background, presumably. You are going for this documentary style quality as well. You've got a highly stylized script, but the actors are delivering it in a very unshowy way. Yeah. And all these things are potential contradictions to the point of making it a bit meaningless.
Yes, or even
harmonized.
Right. It could have so easily been incoherent, couldn't it? It could have been absolutely
That's the
incoherent.
word I was looking for, incoherent or incoherent. Yeah.
And yet it gels together in such a way that it feels pristine almost. It is an amazing piece of work, but that coldness, the documentary coldness of it, where you're just watching this family slowly drive themselves insane through their attempt to mythologize what are horrific circumstances, pure human abjection. This portrait of human abjection at its finest, at its most raw and survivalist, that makes me very uncomfortable. And yet that's brilliant, because that's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
It puts
God. I'm like a dam. I don't want to burst forth too quickly before Mr. Graham arrives.
Right. I think Jack's here, isn't he? Jack just changed the name of the group, so I'm assuming Jack's around.
There's a sign. On a completely frivolous level, my poor doggy, Marnie, my whippet, has been referred to as Black Phillip for 2 weeks.
Love it.
She loves it.
Love it. I do want to have I want to get a pet of some description, basically. So I can call it Black Phillip,
Oh God, yeah, amazing.
Just so I can call it Black Phillip. That's all. A goat would be great. I don't think I have the space or the environment to house like a big goat. But yeah.
I don't know how domestic they. Oh, here he goes.
Hello.
Jack Graham has joined.
Jack,
Hello. What have you been talking about?
Well,
we were trying not to.
We were trying
go too
not
into the witch.
to, but my God, I mean, I, as I said to Elliot, I made the mistake of like rewatching it last night and sitting there like having to pause it every so often because I couldn't breathe watching the damn thing.
This fucking film.
Right.
Oh God.
I'd forgotten.
Oh God.
I don't know why. I don't know why I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten the impact that it originally had. I think it's because when I originally watched it, I had a friend with me. A friend of mine was having a really hard time about 4 years ago, and he came and stayed with me for a little while. And we were sitting like watching Netflix and whatnot, and he said, "Have you watched The Witch?" And I said, "No." And we put it on, and we were basically crawling on the sofa, like squirming in discomfort, and yet also like an arousal of emotion. It just a cocktail of emotions. It was incredible. Yeah, I'll be honest, guys. I'm going to struggle with this one because it's going to be a struggle for me to not just keep going wow and gasping and saying that just referring to technicals alone before you get onto anything else beyond the implications, the themes. I was saying to Elliot earlier, there's no such thing as a perfect created work, but in terms of what this film is attempting to do, the vision behind it, I don't think I've ever seen anything as tightly controlled.
Yeah, as you say, there's no such thing as a perfect created work. This comes pretty close,
right?
I would say
that quality in and of itself has this strange effect of awing you as an audience member, doesn't it? It places you in this very diminished state where you are almost hypnotized by what's happening on screen, and you are prey to it. It's a really strange relationship that this film draws with its audience. It kind of knows that it's as good as it is. It kind of gets it, and yet it's not arrogant, it's not bellicose or belligerent. It's seductive and wonderful, and I could not leave the damn thing alone.
I think some of the areas in which that really does ping out as well is there is an assurance in it that it's not afraid to do the literal thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which I kind of appreciated because it had set up its world. It had set up its world and its time so effectively that it's like, okay, if you're going to be literal with your symbolism, I'm on board because that's their world as well. That is the world, and they follow it right down the line. So that was one area that I was like, okay, I can go with this. And the other is just the considering we now, although we have independent film, we almost don't really have a thing like art cinema like we used to, certainly not since the 90s and backwards. And for a film to unfold at the pace it did and not to go for the obvious the obvious beat and expect a mainstream audience, because I think this film did rather well.
It did. It was marketed strangely. It was marketed as a horror film, which I get. I understand. It certainly has tropes and themes and imagery which are consistent with certain forms of horror, folk horror, notwithstanding. But it's so much more than that.
Well, it made $36 million more than it cost to make, and I'm sorry to bring it down to that disgusting level, but that's a success story. Put it in terms of Mammon, that's a commercial success, by anyone's.
Yeah. That's why they make movies. That's literally the political economy of movies. We spend money to make 3 times as much. That's it. I don't want to say it's not a horror movie because that strikes me as a bit snobbish.
Right,
kind of
it is.
It's too good to be a horror movie.
It is a horror movie. It has all the elements of a horror movie. I mean, and bloody hell, I mean, if you boil horror down to something to a work purely being horrific, then you're not gonna get better, really, because it is just a portrait of human abjection, isn't it? It's despair, it's terror, it's dread, it's insanity. It is all of these things commingled together. But I think what it does is that it for many people who would go to the cinema on the basis that it's a horror film, I think it expands the concept of what that means.
I think there's probably a fair few people that went to see it or bought the DVD or whatever on the basis of the marketing who didn't get what they were expecting. I'm sure that happened.
Absolutely.
Because it was marketed, as I remember very much, as like, oh, it's the next Babadook. It's really, really scary. You know? Which, I mean, look, it's difficult for me to express what this. I mean, it certainly does that thing that great horror does, which is that it has a somatic effect on you. It actually makes. I mean, there are long stretches of this film where I am sort of frozen in place. You know, it's like you kind of get this. Involuntary body reaction, the fight or flight response kicks in, you know, because you are being subjected to something that triggers that just somatically.
It's an amazing thing to be I mean, it sounds really strange, but to be discomforted by a film in the way that this film does. Now, I mean, really, many horror fans will say, oh, that's what we look for, but it's actually not entirely true.
No,
it's not entirely true. There is
looking for that at all.
No, there is a comforting element to what is generally called horror cinema, and that it follows very particular templates and patterns, and it reinforces certain expectations. This does exactly the opposite, and it does it all. It's not just in one area. It does it in every scene. It does it in every interaction. It does it all the way through. It makes you feel soiled. It makes you feel wrong for having experienced it. And there are not many horror films that do that. And I imagine even a lot of horror fans might in fact find that experience alienating.
Yeah, because a lot of them won't have seen stuff like that. They'll have seen, you know, Friday the 13th part 78 or whatever. But you know, there's nothing... There's nothing like that. Not that I have a problem with the Friday the 13th movies. If they're your jam, you have fun. That's fine. And I actually think like the first couple of, you know, they have their interesting points. But yeah, by the time you get to like mashups between Freddy and Jason, you're not. If you go and see that, you're not there for any sort of experience beyond the comfortable.
It's not transgressive, is it? It's not going to be like a commentary on anything, you know.
No. Whereas this is, you know, this is hairs on the back of the neck. As I say, rigid with discomfort, sort of unconsciously getting ready to, as I say, fight or flight. You know, that's how I felt.
It sounds like hyperbole when I say I was pausing it to catch my breath. It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. I was watching it on my own. I was watching it on my laptop, and it was sort of in my lap. So I was absolutely in the thick of this film. The characters were close up to my face, and there were moments I couldn't take it.
Yeah, me too. Like genuinely sort of leaning forward, mouth open, like no territory.
The rawness of emotion and the depth of human abjection that happens here.
And it's so much horror is kind of show-offishly callous, I think.
Right.
It thinks it can create that atmosphere of discomfort and brutality by just being nasty.
Yes.
And it does it with the characters, you know, that it creates as well. The characters are unpleasant people or whatever. Whereas this really is an act of empathy, the characterization and the writing and the performances, which are uniformly brilliant.
They really
are.
Everybody.
Honestly, I can't get over the acting in this. I cannot get over it.
Like
the children actors,
you know, delivering one of the greatest performances you've seen on screen. Then Kate Dickie comes on and she starts delivering one of the greatest performances.
I know.
It's like, what the fuck is happening?
But
here?
there really is.
It's real engagement and enthusiasm.
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
I think that word
it's a real
you used,
act of
Jack.
empathy.
Yeah, empathy. The horror
from
of empathy.
Them and the director and everything. That's what I think it is. I think it's everybody really pouring themselves into this, and it comes across. You care desperately about these people.
It's sincere, isn't it? It's sincere horror.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I think there's probably one argument that might be made, and I mean, you might want to push back on this because I'm thinking on my feet here. You know, there's not many films. There's films in this genre which do incredible things. I mean, we did Blair Witch, as an example. That's a film that does incredible things. But I can't think of many horror films, even horror films I truly love, that can do complexity of character. The ones that spring instantly to mind are this one and perhaps Don't Look Now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that another potential podcast, gentlemen?
That's definitely a potential episode, yeah.
Oh my God. Prepare for the 5-hour podcast.
with just the material on this, because I'd said to George in our preamble before you joined us, Jack, that, this is a fascinating film for me insofar as it almost exists on a curious fault line of the cinematic, the theatrical, and the fine art, the paintings. Right. You're drawing on Vermeer, you're drawing on Goya, obviously, but the complexity of the characters.
Dürer, Hals, there's so much art references.
That you could lift this and make it a stage piece, and a great deal of that is the material, the complexity of the characters. And I mean, even if you just take just one, even if you just take William, the complexity of William, a man who, it breaks down at one point, who is such vulnerability, he's someone who's begging God to save his children, and yet at the same time is sort of determined by a kind of literal, a fundamentalist reading, an absolutist belief that God is salvation. That's the level of objection, and the conflict,
and yet also a manifestation of traditional patriarchy. So he has objectionable elements as well.
Yeah, this is the complexity. This is why he's not an idealistic character, and he's not an anti-hero. He is. This film pulls him in so many different directions throughout its running time. This is a man who is suspicious of witchcraft. He wants to be loved. He wants to love. He wants to be a good father. But he is also able to let his fears and the things that he has learned from a book he absolutely believes in erupt, into this kind of Puritan.
Well, I think that is one of the central tensions of the films. It's that conflict between genuine, sincere humanity and all of its affections, and the hideous mythologies and prescriptions of tradition that turn us against ourselves.
He becomes. We had a brief conversation, Jack, about, bizarrely, Richard III, and it's the same thing with William. He is someone who at the beginning of this film is kind of the force of control. He has a family. He is a patriarch. The world he is in is clay. Well, then he is exiled. So the only thing he's left with, and it's a beautiful symbolic moment in the film, I thought, was sometimes you just see that image of him in the rain, stripped to the waist, chopping wood, because it's the only thing he has control of. And what happens at the end? The devil butts him into a load of wood, which collapses down on him. Basically the only work he's achieved that's been kind of untainted by something, and it all collapses down on him.
And it becomes the source of his death. I mean, it's like the abjection of it. They're just the total, like, metaphysical despair of
the
that.
minor scale. If Richard III is the major scale, because that is, to quote someone whose name escapes me at the moment, the staircase of history, the great winding staircase of history.
Jan Kott.
That's it, Jan Kott, Shakespeare, our contemporary. You've got this and doing it on the minor scale, and it's beautiful. It's so good.
Yeah.
But it's such a wonderful. There is a wonderful remark that Peter Ackroyd makes about Shakespeare in his biography of Shakespeare, where he's talking about Shakespeare's depiction of Wolsey in Henry VIII, and the line is, "When a man fails, Shakespeare's sympathy envelopes him," which I think is just one of the loveliest things any writer has ever written about another writer, and it's so true. Shakespeare is so empathic with so empathic with male failure. Let's be honest. I mean, it's true. But this film has this wonderful quality of being. It depicts these people's failings and failures mercilessly, but it does it without contempt, and it does it with empathy.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm talking about. It's a wonderful act of empathy towards these incredible, complex people who did these things, who did this settlement and conducted these witch trials, etc., and tried to live this incredible, the Puritans really,
right,
essentially,
right.
with all their incredible complexity, because they are staggeringly complex people, radical, and from our modern point of view, incredibly conservative all at once, etc. And I hope we get into this because I have theories about William, etc. But I just love that it portrays, Kate is in many respects an awful person. She is awful to her
daughter. To her daughter. Oh my God!
But the
you
film
can see
never
where everything comes from.
Have empathy for her.
Yeah,
and
because you can see the forces that they're acting on.
I think that's it. That's where the empathy derives from, isn't it? That's where the empathy derives from. From the off that they are all of them victims. It's the benefit of the hindsight of history, isn't it? From a 21st century perspective that these people are poisoned by their mythologies, by their ideologies, and you see that drawn,
they're a part
right,
of, and that they are, because you were talking before about, both of you were talking before about William. For me, this film is profoundly about patriarchy. Robert Eggers has said apparently that he didn't put any feminist themes into it, etc. And I kind of believe that and don't believe it simultaneously. But whatever his intentions were, this is because I've said this before as well. But for me, the fascinating thing about William and Kate's relationship is that they are people forced into a particular kind of power relationship who actually aren't suited for it. William is an essentially passive and kind person who has been forced into the role of a patriarch, and he's not suited for it.
He's not good at it.
Kate is the opposite. Kate is an essentially dominant person who, she's not inherently unkind, I don't think, but she is an essentially dominant person. I think that amazing little speech we get where she talks about the dream where she has this sexual communion with Christ.
Right.
She is, I think, inherently she's a visionary. She is a person who, in another life, given the chance, she'd be Julian of Norwich or somebody like that. Or a great abbess or something like that. But she's been forced by the system that she lives in, just as William has been forced into the role of patriarch he's not suited for. She's been forced into the role of wife, frontier wife, mother, etc., not suited for it. And you have these people forced into these roles by patriarchy, essentially. Both of them deeply unhappy in those roles, loving each other, making each other deeply unhappy, not understanding why, not able to stop it. And it's this dreadful just death spiral of these people trapped in this.
It's the corrosion.
It's
the corrosion that comes from the conflict between their essential humanity, which is loving and that adores one another and wants one another to be happy, essentially, and the engine into which they're born, which is grinding them down.
System that won't let them fulfill that humanity.
It's dissolving their sanity, and that's what you're seeing. That's the portrait that this film paints. It drops you in this almost bizarrely documentarian way. It's like a window has opened onto this family's private insanities.
I tell you, I mean, we've talked before, haven't we, about we've whined before about these movies now where they're so desperate that you get the themes that they explain them to you in the dialogue. This is the exact opposite.
Well, I think this is exactly the case because you were just saying about Catherine. I mean, I found Catherine just incredibly fascinating as a character because she seemed to be enveloped in ambiguities. And this point you just made, Jack, about in another life, the kind of, and because I've only seen the film once, and there is a very easy case to maybe not catch all the fragments when you're only doing one viewing. But in relation to patriarchy, which this sort of, we get this fascinating thing around Catherine, not only the how it gets women to fight each other, and that kind of internalized thing, and which obviously prevents them from finding common ground enough to resist
mothers fighting their daughters, and in fact daughters slaughtering their mothers, it turns out.
heartbreaking moment when Catherine makes the effort. She tries.
Yeah. But it's the language.
Go on.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say it's the fascinating language when she refers to herself as both shrewish wife and grieving mother.
Yeah.
And almost as if she is some kind of visionary. I think one of the real tragedies of the film is that she can't quite understand the things she sees.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the big stark image is the raven or crow pecking at the breast.
Oh God!
Almost like that. And it's almost like the witch in the film is basically saying, you need to get rid of these as burdens to your choices and your freedoms. But she, and Catherine obviously sees it. Will see a nurturing act or the desecration of a nurturing function.
It's totally that. It's totally that.
And it's like, oh, you've seen something, but at the same time, like a door has been opened, but you've looked the wrong way down it.
Right.
And the tragedy of that is just incredible. Particularly, and I thought it's really interesting that you said that about the visionary thing, because I couldn't help noticing the cup returned just before that scene.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, hang on a moment. What's going on now? Where are we now? Is she in control of the narrative now, or are we seeing it through her eyes now? And then she seems to get an awful lot of information which she mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's tragic.
I read it slightly differently. I read it as the devil, getting her through her strength, which has of course become her weakness because it's been thwarted.
Yeah.
It gets her through the things she wants, the things that she wants back, the cup,
yes, of course.
And the two missing
and her children, of course.
The two children that she cares about more than the others, frankly. But that's what it does. It says, these things you have lost that I have taken away from you, actually.
Mm-hmm.
That I can give them back to you. Aren't I kind? But it's also, what it's doing is it's getting to her through her capacity to have visions. You have that scene where she talks about essentially having an erotic, transcendent religious vision of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
A revelation
ravishing
of
her.
a revelation of divine love, to use the term from Julian of Norwich. And what the devil does is, that was your strength. That has become your weakness because it has been thwarted and stunted, because you haven't been allowed to develop that power, that capacity. Instead, you've been forced into the box of wife through patriarchy, etc. That is how I get you.
That's how I get you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because to me, there's nothing. The devil is another part of the same system for me. That's how I read this.
Yeah, he is not like an icon of liberation or anything to that effect. No, he's part of the same engine.
This is going to be interesting when we get there, because I think it's really wrinkled, that bit. I don't disagree with you, but I think it's the transaction at the end is really fascinating.
You
wrinkles.
are right. It does depend on the character, doesn't it? Like for Thomasin, it is absolutely a moment of revelation. It's where she discovers herself. She ultimately, through abjection, she just says, fuck it, who cares anymore? Who cares? What does it matter?
It's very ambiguous, because I don't feel that Thomasin has any choice to do what she does. I mean, essentially what has happened is that everything has been taken away from her. She has lost her family. She has no other options at this point. She goes to Black Phillip and makes the offer, because basically all she's got left is herself to sell.
It's a kind of abandon. It's a surrender, isn't it?
You used the word, Elliot, transaction. It's incredibly transactional, and I think what she's doing is she's selling, and it's specifically just as Kate was bought with a silver cup, a valuable commodity, a thing. The devil buys Thomasin with butter and pretty dresses. And
well, it's
like
the sin. I mean, we're going deep into the sin of avarice, aren't we?
But we're also getting, in my opinion, we're getting deep into how the Christian early modern imagination imagined, the European Christian early modern imagination imagined this to work. Because what we find anthropologically is that belief in witches of some kind is almost universal. Like almost every human society and culture has had some idea of this type, right? Throughout history, throughout levels of development, everywhere, basically, humans have imagined something like this. But within that universal, you have an incredible level of variation. Like almost everything else is up for grabs. The age of the witch, the sex of the witch, the motivation of the witch,
the nature of her, whether she's hideous or beautiful, a seductress or a hag or whatever.
Yeah, how autonomous he or she is, whether they're a stranger or a member of the community. Like everything else is culturally specific. So you can't just explain the witch craze in Europe by saying, well, it's just like humans do this. We just, you have to say it takes this specific form for a specific reason. And there's interesting theories about this. But one of the key things that develops through in Europe in this era, in the era of the witch trials, the witch craze, if you want to call it that, is the idea of the transaction.
Yes.
It's all over this film. You sign the book.
You sign the book. Yeah.
You sell your soul, etc. So it's very much. It's very much a question of commodification. It's a marketized relationship. And
absolutely.
This is a product of the birth of capitalism in Europe. What you end up with, I'll just get to the end of this bit because this is really fascinating to me. You have Silvia Federici's amazing book Caliban and the Witch, where she talks about how so much of this attack upon women throughout Europe in the witch craze was about the rise of capitalism. It was about stripping women of property that they had under feudalism, rights they had under feudalism. It was about getting them out of the guilds. It was about getting them out of urban work. It was getting them back into the home because capitalism needed essentially to create this new kind of sexual pact, sexual relationship, essentially the nuclear family, because it needed to have the proletariat. It needed to have the woman in the house doing unpaid domestic labor, reproducing the household, while the man became a free wage laborer.
Right, so it's a kind of sexual slavery in a way.
It is. It's kind of, in Silvia Federici's theory about how this works, that is, the witch craze, the witch trial, that vast wave of repression is one way in which rising capitalism achieved this rearrangement. And
so the witch becomes an emblem of a kind of anti-feminist commodification of the woman.
Exactly.
Real, wow.
Federici even sees it as directly prefiguring what happens in the New World with New World slavery and the dispossession of native peoples, etc. Now, what it looks like to me at the end here is what has happened to Thomasin at the end, but she has been stripped of everything. She has no male support system, no father.
Right.
She has no property. She has no way of living, essentially. She has been stripped of all options except the option to enter into a commodified power relationship. It's like the woman in Federici's theory becoming the wife in the new capitalist order who is now essentially the slave of the system. So that's why, to me, the end I don't interpret at all as any sort of, feminist detournement of the witch,
a liberation or anything like that.
No, to me, that's not it. It's not, because this film takes the ideas of the people who actually lived at this time. It takes them at face value and just puts them on screen.
Yeah.
Now, that's its brilliant coup to me. It doesn't try to do a commentary on them. It doesn't try to spin them. It doesn't really even try to analyze them. It just says these people thought this
was true. Yeah.
This. They thought it was true. They thought it was happening. We are going to show you the world as they really believed that it was.
Witches and all. Yeah.
What you end up with is that ideology. So it's incredible that it fits so perfectly. That ideology leads to the woman essentially in a dark mirror of this process, in European rising capitalism. She ends up forced into this new slavery. To me, that's what the end looks like. It looks like being forced into a different kind of patriarchal subjection.
Well, it's hard to see it in any other way, really, because of the
I've got a slightly naughty interpretation of this, and but I'll come at that in a moment.
Well, simply because of the male power dynamic. I mean, you're swapping God for Lucifer. There is still that overarching patriarchal figure is still there, and he is still the authority.
Black Phillip, when he appears in human form, he's very, very well dressed, isn't he? He's wearing very nice, opulent clothes. He's dressed like a cavalier.
I mean, I will say this: there is an ambiguity.
Okay,
I've
got some wrinkles to explore.
Go ahead. Yeah,
okay,
go ahead.
Because I'm not actually in complete disagreement with you, but I find this whole section of the movie really knotty for me because I agree that dialogue at the end is brilliant, and it's about. I mean, it's not only about a shift, remove your shift. It is about a shift, as you say. It's farewell to the family. It's farewell to the glue of a particular religion. She's about to enter into an economic relationship with a very material devil, as you say, dressed as a cavalier. She will be. You can make the argument that, and I agree. Although she's rid of the oppressions of family, she's rid of the oppression of religion, of the suspicion of being cursed, of servitude, she isn't gaining any freedom. Now, this is where I'm going to park this, because this is where I do agree with you, because my first reading of this was she's not gaining any freedom. The devil is another patriarch, albeit not a straightforward one. He demands a contract. He enters her into a new kind of economic relationship. She is quick to pick up on how transactions and bartering of this kind of thing will work. He even guides her hand because she cannot write, and I think that's fascinating, particularly in regards to scripture and William's plight, because he is what we would now term a fundamentalist. And it's somewhat framed in the story at the beginning as well. But now this is where I'm going to.
Yeah, I want to put a pin in that because I want to come back to exactly what William's theology is. But yeah, please go on.
Yeah, that's cool. But this is where things started to become a bit knotty for me, because one of the things that was very clear was that there was one element of patriarchy that Black Phillip did not seem to wish to engage in. And when you consider the mythological crossovers between the devil and paganism and Pan, he is not interested in sexually dominating Thomasin. The other interesting thing is, and it could be purely accidental, but he's played by an actor of color, even though he is not fully seen. Now, if we're going to cross over now again with something like the Miltonian idea of the devil, the cast out, Lucifer, we have the horned beast who is linked to a witch, or witches who are exiled women. There's nothing in the film that suggests to me that he seeks to dominate them. The contract could be read as a portal to something beyond. I almost felt at the end that you can definitely funnel into this kind of, this is how the world was. This is the ideology that's coming. This is the wrinkle in history that's about to happen. But there was just something in. I'm going to put this very, very almost crassly, but it's like for Thomasin. Well, if being the good girl is to be mistrusted, abused, threatened with fucking burning at one point by your own family, why not the hell join the other team where there is some kind of liberation or sisterhood or freedom or sexual magic or community?
That ambiguity is there.
And the thing is, where the film sort of leaves me in this kind of, well, where are we with this, is because Black Phillip doesn't seem to be holding sway over their community. He just seems to be a kind of conduit to it. So I thought, well, he's not going to dominate her sexually. He has got her into a contract that cannot be denied, and this is a compromised freedom. I don't think she's necessarily replaced one prison for another. She kind of has, but there was something in the ending at the same time. I thought there's a communication cord that can be pulled here if she's in this group with these women. And she quite consciously laughs at the end of the thing. Now, whether that's a laugh of, I've been fucking had, in a way, or that there is a kind of optimistic mark. It's very difficult to say, but I found that really knotty. Really knotty.
And I think that is deliberately so. I think there are ambiguities to be drawn from the conclusion of the film, and that is very, very deliberate. I mean, given Thomasin's situation and the utter complete abjection she finds herself in at the end, then wouldst thou live deliciously? Well, fuck yeah, why not? Why not? There's nothing else in this world, in this wretched, smeared, vile, disease, starving world. Why not?
And if God has not abandoned her, he's certainly given her no choice. If we're going to work within the logic of a world which absolutely believes in God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the answer to the question why not is that it involves, mashing babies up and smearing their entrails
yes, there
all
is
over
that.
Every silver lining has a cloud.
I think I might have given the wrong impression, because I'm not necessarily, when I was talking, I wasn't necessarily sort of reading the movie, because I think one of the incredibly special things about this movie is that this movie isn't about what it says, if you know what I mean.
Right, yeah.
Because most movies, even some of the great films, some of the great texts, they are, when you engage in the act of criticism, when you engage in the act of reading them, what you're doing is you're kind of trying to make sense of what they say to you. I think that's kind of a category error in this case. I think this movie isn't about what it says to you. It's just about what it makes you think about what it puts there.
It's triggers.
Because as I say, the project of this film is to just fairly closely, there are some departures here and there, but to fairly closely put the actual experience and actual belief system of these people on screen as much as is possible, and to just kind of put it there and say, there you go. That's
what do you think?
Thought.
Yeah.
I think maybe what was sort of probably in my mind as well, and it's something else you've mentioned, Jack, which is Caliban and the Witch, which was this, because absolutely, Federici argues, like the witch hunts, for instance, there's a kind of dying breath of feudalism, or at least a feudal order that Federici describes, and all the the superstitions of those societies, and how it was reshaped, and how the working class emerges in a new form, and the transition to capitalism then follows. But of course, this is also a book which talks about how women tore down hedges and fences and reclaimed commons, and although the witch is pictured as a sort of an abjection, a degradation, a radical other. The fact that they end up sort of leading peasant revolts, that's in that book as well. And I think that being in the back of my mind probably did sort of. As I say, made the end of this film sort of like, okay, right, this is not straightforward.
No, it's not.
No, I think
definitely not straightforward.
Delicious about it, but of course, given my sort of tendency to read things initially, at least from a hopefully fairly material and grounded way, it was like, okay, I can see how this is a transaction. I can see how this is the sort of ideological culmination of, but my God, there's some really, really. And are these wrinkles intended, or are they accidental? Is there something I should be reading into the fact that, as I said, they've cast an actor of colour to play Black Phillip, and we don't even see him fully; we just hear him.
Well, I think
that is just, I think, it's quite a daring thing to do, but it is just part of the film's project to, as far as possible, put what these people thought on screen, because there is a deep connection in the minds of these sorts of Puritan settlers between the people of color, the native peoples, and the satanic. They literally thought that the land they were in was the land of the devil. That is what they thought. They thought that the true elect of God was sort of, they were at the gates of Satan's kingdom. They thought they were literally there.
They even see Native Americans at the gates of the Pilgrim settlement.
They even refer to the color of the Native American skin as a kind of rubrication of a satanic mark, if you like, which of course filtered down into Mormonism. Mormonism actually thought that for up until the 1970s. That was the official stance, That
whole thing about the Lamanites, which is what they call the native peoples, being one of the because they think everybody's one of the lost tribes of Israel. It's one of the tribes that's it's the bad one. So God quote unquote curses them with dark skin.
Yes, I think
marked. It's sort of like marked by Cain or something absurd.
But that's John.
That was rewritten until like something ludicrous, like 1978 or something.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely
those
true.
Were excised,
But that's Joseph Smith, creating his own Bible from bits from the Old Testament combined with 19th century race science. That's exactly what it is.
And for the interests of utter materialism, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that people like Joseph Smith and John Miller are absolute con artists and didn't believe a word of what they put about.
I mean, this is the dividing line between fanatical delusion and con artistry, conscious cynical con artistry is one of those perennially.
Well, it's paper thin, isn't it? I mean, Arthur Miller explores it in The Crucible, of course, where you have, which this film, by the way, resembles in many, many respects. That's another big influence, where you actually have people making accusations of witchcraft because they want their neighbour's land.
Yeah, except that the Crucible is kind of like the outside view, isn't it? It's almost like the detached materialist modern day person looking in at these people through a microscope, so to speak, and analysing them. There's another
maybe something like The Witch of Edmonton, which has direct parallels with Elizabeth Sawyer getting sort of revenge by selling her soul to the devil, who appears to her as her dog. A black dog.
Well, and another reason, of course, why they have to make Black Phillip an actor of colour when he appears is that was typical when in the accounts they had from people who said they had conversed with the devil. These people would typically say it was a black man. The women in Salem said that. This is Salem's a good while after this. It's kind of a re-eruption, but that's
of course,
what they say.
What's interesting is how everything doubles, because that's absolutely true. And in the context of the universe that's being created, of course, that piece of cast. But we cannot help seeing a film from near now, watching it now, also with freighted into that is the fact this is also someone from a marginalized group, a group that has been historically marginalized, talking to someone from a historically marginalized group, and then it just freights in all this other information, and it's like, then you just end up with this completely rich vein of competing, actually in many respects overlapping, because the whole thing, if you go back to the Miltonian, even drawing on Genesis, the cast out, the marginalized figure, the fallen angel. But
our modern impulse would be to very much sort of try to consciously draw some sort of line of solidarity, between the sort of the deturned figure of Satan as kind of a rebel outsider, and these subaltern populations. Whereas, I mean, it's daring and it's problematic. It's very hard not to. Yeah, it kind of just suggests itself. But one of the things that's daring and problematic about this film, and it's part of how it has this incredible somatic effect, is that it just kind of says, no, we're not doing that. What we're doing, instead of doing this crucible thing where we kind of, as modern day people, we look in on these people, it just says we are getting inside their heads and presenting on screen as real the world as they conceptualize it.
It's their emotional lives, isn't it, rather than their cultural lives, I suppose.
So it can't really do that thing where it sort of consciously, artistically draws the parallel. It just shows you what these people thought, and what they thought suggests all sorts of things.
And it's fascinating that what they think informs the world around them. It actually seems to have an effect. It makes that world something other, something mythological in and of itself. So you literally have witches wandering around. You literally have a devil avatar in the form of Black Phillip.
This is another thing that's amazing about the film. There are long stretches, the film says quite early on, yes, there's a witch. Here she is. Look, she's a traditional witch, as they would have imagined such a figure. She's doing what they thought witches, etc., etc. But then there are long stretches of the film where it is just, for all that we know, just naturalistic. What the bit that got me this time round, I have to say, is the bit in the attic when Caleb comes back and Mercy and Jonas turn, so to speak, on Thomasin, and they start having their fits. Now, to us in our world, looking at that, we kind of just we are bound to interpret that in a certain way, because we know about Salem, we know
mass
about hysteria,
that
we know about
thing.
all this stuff. So when the kids start doing that, we just sort of we are bound to see that in a certain way. And then because the film puts Thomasin so much at the center and makes her, so to speak, our point of view character and the main object of our empathy, we, unconsciously, we kind of just expect Thomasin to think what we think.
Yeah.
But she speaks up, and she doesn't think they're just imagining it or pretending. She thinks they're possessed.
Yeah.
In fact, that was one of the very, very skillful bits of the film where they skillfully avoided, that device which so many things do, particularly if they're period set, where they just basically take someone composed of all the kind of values, archetypes, or things we value as being liberal, and just plummet them back in time.
The
and
nice but then character.
Yeah,
that's a brilliant way of describing it. Tim nice but then. And it's so fucking annoying, and this doesn't. That scene is really great.
As a tangent, Doctor Who, recent day Doctor Who does that all the bloody time, and it's really annoying.
It does, but it's. I mean, I'm not defending modern Doctor Who, but everything does it now. If you watch any sort of mainstream ITV or BBC drama, whether it's about a cutesy 1950s vicar who solves crimes, or or any one of these 712 cop shows that are on, or whatever, if it's set in the 60s or the 50s or the 1830s or whatever, it doesn't matter. You will get a storyline about some gay guys or whatever, and the main character, the hero, will have strange, incongruous, anachronistically liberal modern 21st century opinions about it.
Yeah.
It's
very strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
it's just, I understand that not every story featuring gay people or black people, whatever, should necessarily have to be about their oppression, because my God, that must be fucking tiring. But it becomes a lie. It just becomes a lie about our culture.
It does.
It just becomes racism and sexism and homophobia edited out, doesn't it?
Yeah, and as a result of that, becomes racism and sexism and homophobia in and of itself, because it's erasing our history, right?
Yeah, it's a double lie as well, because by having, as you brilliantly put, the nice but then character, at the same time as that character has to be crowbarred into the action, we're also doing something else, which E.P. Thompson said, the condescension of posterity. Yeah. There were lots of people around. They didn't phrase it in nice modern liberal ways. They didn't phrase it by cuts to them hand wringing. They phrased it in different ways. They phrased it as with the vocabulary of their time, but they were no less radical thinkers or radical actors, and that is also a point which annoys me. And I think this film is very, very good on this front, because one of the ways you can absolutely read that scene with Thomasin and seeing the twins, like any part of the way the film unfolds, is in a very literal way. Black Phillip tries to get inveigle his way in every single member of the family, and she's just the last one. And that's why she's our focus point, because she's the one that lasts the longest. Although he is successful, he's tried it with everyone. The twins, the father, Catherine, he's tried everyone. Caleb.
Right.
And it's just Thomasin to go.
And assuming Black Phillip's influence, I mean, the children's fits and repeating what Thomasin is saying, it could be read as just Black Phillip trying to sow mischief and distrust and discord, you know.
And it's so beautifully open. It does that Blair Witch thing where we talked about the hysteria of just being out in the woods and everything. I mean, we know the corn is infected with that fungus,
the ergot, yes. But don't you just love that it never calls attention to it? It never. There's no horrible sort of lingering shot where it shows you the ergot. It just pans across, and it's just the corn is in the background. It's being shucked or it's hanging up, and you just see it. It's just on the corn,
Yeah, that's all it is. But that's it. It's just another detail. It just puts it there.
It's another layer.
If you want to read the film in the most vulgar and reductive way to make yourself feel better, you can.
And also, it's just another layer in the sheer abjection this family are going through. They're starving. They haven't eaten enough. They're tired. They're weary. They're suffering tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and they're also being poisoned by what they're eating.
Yeah, it's so many layers. Many details it runs on. It's incredible, really.
Did anyone else jump out of their skin at the Black Phillip moment at the end this time round when he comes from off the side of the screen? It terrified me. Absolutely terrified me.
It is incredibly ominous. Yeah, I remember the first time I watched it, I wasn't surprised when he started talking, because it is suggested by the wedge shot, just no shot of him, just a shot of her face looking at him. It's also, I think, it's slightly reminiscent of that sequence from Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ, where the lion starts talking to Jesus in the wilderness.
Yes. Wow.
But it's a wonderful sequence.
Yeah, an inversion of it, totally, almost like a total inversion of it. Brilliant.
Well, except that the lion is Satan.
Except the lion is Satan. Yeah.
But, if they're just hallucinating, then I'd like to know how Thomasin knows the Enochian language, because it would mean she would have to be hallucinating the bit at the end where they're chanting, and the chanting is in John Dee's and Edward Kelly's Enochian language.
Right.
So, yeah, if that's just a hallucination,
it's a bloody good one, isn't it?
Not bad. It comes with all sorts of insights
as they go. It's very good, and it's fascinating that, of course, that the boy also hallucinates the same thing basically at various points. So yeah, that's an odd one.
Yeah, well, it's clear how it's trying to get into him, isn't it? It's trying to get into him via the fact that he is, he's becoming an adolescent boy.
Becoming an adult. Yeah.
Yeah,
but there's also that wonderful crossover with Catherine again and again. I'm wondering if it's because of the order of how Black Phillip tries to sort of inveigle his way into them, because Caleb's last moments just utterly recall this idea of being sexually ravaged by God, as Catherine explains it.
Yeah.
It's and it's a very male conception of sex as well.
Yeah.
I mean, although he's in a sort of blissed out state, and he talks about God's sweet kisses and embraces, it's sex is forceful. It's sex is overwhelming.
Right. Yeah. Well, his last gasp
violent,
is almost orgasmic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's it's an ejaculate of the soul.
Yeah, and having heard what Catherine, almost in a throwaway line, has said earlier, though it's not a throwaway line because it absolutely sticks out, because you think that's a very, very interesting image for a family that had been framed as a puritanical family. So yeah, that's an incredible piece, and an incredible just to take it to your performance level. It's I mean, how they got.
That's the moment that chills me the most. That is the moment. It's beautiful. I mean, the framing, the lighting, the performance, everything is absolutely beautiful. The language, the performance, and yet it's also deeply, deeply disturbing and horrific. It's an amazing ambiguity that sequence arouses. I think
particularly as William himself, William the father, is the film just shows him in every sense growing increasingly impotent.
Yeah,
and then you're faced with the boy becoming maturing, physically maturing, sexually maturing. It's very stark. I mean, it's uncomfortable. But such a mesmerizing sequence.
It's the intensity of it. It's that quiet intensity that gets me. The emotions on display there are so stark and so profound. There are not many films that take you to that point emotionally.
No.
But I want to know. I want to know what's happening to Caleb at that point, because it's more like, to me, it's more like Caleb has kind of spiritually survived the contact with the witch. You can read it as him having been taken and sapped and sent back a husk, etc. But you can also read it as kind of the witch got him and he got away somehow. And he has actually made it through the other side. Like, Caleb's big worry right from the start, after Samuel disappears unbaptized, and that's a huge issue that I really want to get back to that. But he's worrying and worrying and worrying about that. Is Samuel in hell? Is Samuel in hell? Now, these are people who profoundly believed in predestination. And that is obviously relevant, because they actually have William and Caleb have that conversation. They just lay it all out there. Now, Caleb is worried. he's worried about Samuel, and of course that's an avatar for his worry about himself.
Of course.
He is worried about the fact that he's having these feelings that he shouldn't be having about Thomas, etc., etc. He doesn't know what's going to happen to him. Is he destined for hell, etc.? Now, it could be that, tempted by the witch, even taken by the witch, nevertheless, he gets out the other side, and instead of being taken in the same way that ultimately Thomason is taken, accumulated again. There's this monster of accumulation thing again. Instead of that, he gets out the other side, and instead of being taken that way, he finds communion with God. He finds communion with the Holy Spirit. So from his point of view, I think that those last moments are joyous. I think that's him. I think that's him thinking, I made it. I am one of the chosen. I am one of the elect.
It's rapture, and that is symbolically represented in that scene. I mean, the light, for one thing, that's shining on Caleb and makes him into this pale angelic figure, but he also vomits up the apple.
Well, yes, I mean that it's almost axiomatic.
The apple,
right. I mean, what is that imagery other than that? It's the rejection of the witch's temptation, isn't it? Of her.
Well, it's
also
Snow White,
coughing up of original sin.
Yeah, of course.
Just taken the words from me. Yeah, you've just rejected original sin. You are the only for the few more seconds that he is alive. He is the only man on that earth that does not carry the taint of original sin. He has vomited up the apple. It's an amazing moment.
Yeah, which is why his final moments are rapturous and beatific. It's
But again, this is profoundly what these people believed. And the film just puts it there on screen and says, "There you go. Make of that what you will."
Yeah. No judgment, no context for interpretation. It doesn't force you. It doesn't sort of force interpretation into your lap.
And it's all part of this, it being this incredible act of empathy, I think, with these people. It has the courage and it has the respect for them to say, these were people like you and me, very similar, because it goes out of its way to make us understand that they had the same sorts of feelings and impulses and neuroses and bitternesses and resentments in families and sexual desires and frustrations, etc., that we all have. But it also goes out of its way to show that their thought world is profoundly different. But it has the respect for them to say, here they are. This is what they thought. They really, really did think this. It's completely alien to us, but this was the world they lived in. As I say, it doesn't do that sort of crucible thing where it looks at them from outside through a microscope. It gets inside them and then shows you the inside, where everything that they took to be a reality of the world is just put there literally as a thing. Now, that is incredibly powerful to me. It's what makes this film special, because it's like this intense act of you almost feel like you're in contact with people.
Across time. It's a window, isn't it? It's a window cut open in time.
There's a vanishingly small number of films about the past that actually allow you to feel like you are living in the minds of people who actually once existed in profoundly different worlds, but who were nonetheless human like you.
Yeah, and the fact that
wonderful.
Everyone involved seems to understand that. They seem to get that. The actors get that, and are so intent on giving you something sincere and legitimate. It's an amazing thing.
The idea of living a life, obviously so distant from us now. We have different chimeras and things now, but
don't we just
to be so profoundly wrapped up in mythology to the point where the mythology is completely it might as well be material. I mean, it is you live your entire life. It is very potent in this film.
There is no point in crafting a narrative in this culture and this era which tries to delineate between the material reality and the mythological. There's just no point.
No, because these people lived in a world where to them this what we would call the supernatural was a physical reality. It was
side by side with them.
It was a given.
And in their thought, as you said, that scene with Caleb, distraught over the idea of it's partly self-interest, but just distraught over the idea that a sibling is an unbaptized sibling is not
Is
in
in
paradise.
hell, right.
Well, it is
God,
it is a horrifying idea, and this is. I mean, I've been wanting to get back to this the whole time, but I mean, I read William as an Anabaptist. Maybe not. Yeah. Maybe not literally, like in the sense of he might not define himself that way. He might not be a member of, an organization or anything. But to me, I mean, the question is never answered why he leaves the settlement.
All we know is that it's a theological difference.
The plantation.
That's
it's a
all
theological
we know.
Difference of some kind. Well, one of the great schisms within Protestantism during this era, not quite this era, but
the delaying of baptism
is the delaying of baptism, and that's what Anabaptism is all about. Anabaptists, they said, well, if it's about choice, if it's about what you believe and what you choose to do, and what you choose to believe this, and you choose to give your allegiance to Christ, etc., then how can you baptize babies? That's silly. Right. They can't choose. And of course, Luther came out against that. I think Zwingli came out against it. They all came out against it. It was profoundly transgressive, but it feeds into a revolutionary movement in Europe, the Anabaptist Munster, where, the Anabaptists in Munster did some dreadful things. Let's not lie about it. But they were a revolutionary movement.
Well, I've just recently reread Q.
They did it in the context of a siege, and et cetera, et cetera. And Protestants allied with Catholics to attack Anabaptist Munster, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a huge deal. They used Jan van Leyden. I think that's what he was called, the leader. It was like this scaremonger, bogeyman hate figure for years afterwards. It was a huge deal. And to me, the whole business about Samuel not being baptized, he and Kate have an argument about it. Now, you can read it as she's pregnant when they leave the plantation, so they haven't had a chance to baptize him, I suppose. But you could also read it as William comes to Anabaptist convictions.
Right.
And that's why they leave, because he says, no, I'm not going to baptize my new baby.
I think that's a more interesting interpretation, because that it feeds into the tensions between him and his wife, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah, it brings a whole new dimension to this furious controversy between them after Samuel disappears. And it really, taking the baby is not just the witch doing what witches do. What these people absolutely believed witches do. They absolutely believed without question that witches stole babies and ground them up and smeared them all over their bodies and stuff like that. But it's also the devil going right for the weakest point, not just in the sense of like the weakest member of the party, but the point of direct contention.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean that being,
it also happens to be a fault line right down the middle of Protestant ideology. Fascinating. right down the division between Protestants' revolutionary and conservative wings, so to speak. But
and the way that schism manifests itself in this plot is sort of pure Leviticus as well. The goat will carry on itself all their sins to a remote place. That is the plot. That's extraordinary. In fact, I couldn't. As is you'll find is a kind of regular obsession of mine on these podcasts. I end up sort of trying to find not trying to find, but it occurs to me that each one of these films has its twin, its sort of inverted twin. And I couldn't help but thinking this was very much a kind of perfect companion piece. I don't know if either of you have seen Bergman's Audette.
No, I haven't.
Yeah,
and it feels very much like the inversion of this film. Obviously, that ends on a similar moment of kind of exaltation and everything, but in a more in a more Christian, that lots of beats that have a similarity to them, but they almost act like the light and shade of one another. And I thought the next time I watch The Witch, I'd really love to watch it back to back with Audette in whichever order. I think that they potentially are very fine companion pieces to each other.
It's funny because I kind of had a similar feeling, not just about this, which I did, but in between our recordings, I remembered Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, and it struck me that that's kind of the twin to the Blair Witch Project. It's
I
kind
love
of,
how you said in terms of Peter Watkins, in terms of like that's the monoculture. And I thought that's brilliant because I mean I'm a big fan of Watkins as well, and here's a lovely interview on the end of his epic and wonderful Paris Commune drama doc, where he goes into real detail about that part of his thinking, and I just punched the air and went, yeah, so is.
But the other thing you were talking about, Audette, I kind of had a feeling about this film while I was watching it too, kind of like a twin or a companion piece, which is, I don't know if you know this, but there's a movie from the 1940s called Day of Wrath. It's a Dreyer film, Carl Theodor Dreyer.
Yes.
Yeah,
I know
it's
exactly
about,
what you mean. Yes,
it's set in Denmark. And
that's
it.
And they think the mother's a witch, don't they? And she's accused of the old woman's accused of witchcraft, isn't she? That's it. And
it's about a young woman who is married to I don't know what the correct word is, pastor, I suppose, who's not a bad guy, but he's a conventional patriarchal. He's quite kind, but he's that much older than her, etc. And she of course, quite naturally starts to have feelings for a younger man, etc. And through this sort of concatenation of circumstances, it leads to this witch accusation, and it's as I remember it anyway, it's a wonderful character study and a wonderful sort of materialist and realist laying out of how these things actually worked in terms of actual social dynamics, accusations and trials and torture and stuff like that. Bits of it are extremely upsetting.
Well, that actually makes sense because I've given you a bum steer, of course, because Audette is not Bergman. It is Dreyer. Audette is a Dreyer film.
Shit!
Yeah, I know what I've done. I know what I'm getting it confused with in my head. I'm getting it confused with Wild Strawberries. I don't know where I've gone, but my brain does this sometimes. But I've now disentangled them in my head. No, Audette is a Carl Dreyer film, so apologies to listeners. Yeah.
So we both independently thought of Dreyer.
Yeah, but I got confused into Bergman. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. I'd say the thing with Day of Wrath is I think that's a stronger kind of companion piece. I think what Audette is, it's like a weird inversion, which it's more of a flip side. But yes, of course, Audette's a Dreyer film. Yeah, I've just tangled up in my head with Wild Strawberries for some bizarre reason. This is what happens when you're over 40. All that to look forward to.
The other thing I kind of wanted to get to is that it was a big part of the ideology of the witch craze that kind of just the existence of witches was proof of God and proof of God's plan. It was absolutely, because of course they believed, nothing could happen without God's permission, God being all powerful. So this must be happening because God's allowing it to happen.
Yeah.
So, the devil is doing this. He's sort of recruiting this vast, secret, international, conspiratorial army of women who are undermining Christian civilization. And doing
so in bafflingly petty ways, it seems.
Yeah, I mean... Once you get into the actual sort of workings of this, it's like the trouble is the minute you start actually trying to imagine how this works, you just end up with the chick trapped, don't you? It's,
But what is it? Is it? I can't remember the name of the particular priest. Oh gosh, medieval priest Teluthian or something like that. But I think it reminded, what you're saying reminds me very much when he was asked to describe heaven and couldn't. And he said, "Well, I can describe hell." It's far easier. but it is that
that's absolutely true of any poet or artist that has ever attempted to depict or describe those two phenomena. I mean, you read the Inferno, the part of the Divine Comedy. It's far more specific and explicit than the other part, which is entirely abstract.
And I mean, then you just get into the what people like Heinrich Kramer writing like Malleus Maleficarum. I mean, he had a field day writing that, didn't he? Because
clearly,
that's your way of identifying and dealing with witches.
It's quite incredible. It's quite an incredible. Have you read that book?
I've dipped into it. It is quite something. It
is quite incredible. The specificity of how one determines what is a witch, and the names of the familiars. There are very specific familiars that turn up. Vinegar Tom and the like.
Yes, Vinegar Tom. And I mean, talking about that there's a very good play by Carol Churchill called Vinegar Tom, which again has because of the way that the witch, as I said, does seem to tread this fault line of a theatrical piece. As well as a cinematic piece, but Vinegar Tom is also a very interesting touchstone for The Witch as well.
Mm-hmm.
Very good play by Carol Churchill.
Oh right,
yeah.
That was a specifically British iteration of it, though. It was another thing, like the animal familiars thing. That was very directly a British thing. They didn't really have that elsewhere, which is why it plays such a big role in the sort of Matthew Hopkins thing later on.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. But it's it's another. I mean, it's I think it's pretty historically accurate to the American colonial experience. Nevertheless, that the familiars. The animal familiars should play such a huge role in this scenario that we get in The Witch, because the family are explicitly from England. They're
right.
Not even by way of Switzerland, as a lot of them went. No, just apparently just straight from England. So it's in their imagination of how these things would work. Then they absolutely animals would, and the animals are so, like, the way the hairs are shot. It's so eerie. You get
there is something very uncanny about the animals in this, and the way they are portrayed, the way they're framed. It makes them bizarrely alien. There's an uncanniness to them.
Yeah, and the repeated emphasis on hairs I find very creepy, because I just associate it immediately with the M.R. James story, The Ash Tree, which is one of my favourites of all his stories. And you have the witch figure, Mrs. Mothersole, who again, it's never it's never explicit, but she is seen gathering berries and sprigs of mistletoe and shit from a tree, and then the lord of the manor goes to catch her and he can't find her, and then suddenly he sees a hare running across the field, and he chases the hare all the way back to her house. It's great stuff. James bases another of his stories very directly on actual mythology, the Fen Stanton witch, because a lot of this comes to America via East Anglia, because loads of these, I mean, this family and this obviously not, but loads of these families were from that area, the Fens and shit like that.
Of course.
Yeah. And also that just being there, setting it there, and I love the glimpse we get of I think it's the two Native Americans. Watch
the Wampanoag,
and there's
blink and you'll miss it.
It's so loaded, isn't it? Because I mean, they're all interlopers. It's not just the interloper. Everyone is an interloper.
This is it. The witch, the contingent of the devil, the devil's party, to borrow a phrase, in the woods, in the forest. They are as much immigrants as the Puritans, aren't they?
Right.
The witches that we see are all white women. Well, I mean, Black Phillip is an actor of color, but he's not a Native American.
Right.
He is if
the signifier
he were
of the dress, absolutely.
Yeah, and also, of course, if he were a human being, then he would be the kind of human being who was in the American continent because he'd been dragged there in chains.
Of course.
Yeah. not
So,
someone indigenous.
It shows again that even the Devil's Party in this scenario are kind of a part of the same colonial system, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then I think that was kind of what I wanted to get to when I was talking before about how they saw the devil's activities and the activities of witches as proof of God and as happening with God's permission, because they saw it as all part of the last days, because they thought that, as everybody seems to, they thought they were living at the end of the world. It was almost up. Any minute now it's over. That's what they thought they were doing in New England. They thought they were building the New Jerusalem, ready for the apocalypse. But it's suggestive to me that we're dealing with a closed system. It is ultimately not the American forest. It's ultimately not the terra incognita of the forest that is the problem, because the things that are in the forest that are threatening the settlers are themselves as alien to the forest as the settlers.
Right,
it's what you've dragged with you, and that's why when she is crying to them, "I want to go home." She's talking about home. And it
reminds me of that amazing line in the short story Lukundu. I don't know if you know that, by Edward Lucas White, where it's this incredible commentary on imperialism and colonialism. This guy goes out to the African jungle, and he finds another explorer. And what's happened is that because of this curse that's been put on him by the natives, these guys have started to grow sort of alien second heads, like African men's tiny little heads are growing on his body and gibbering and screaming at him and stuff like this. It's incredibly disturbing. But there's a line later on where he says, I brought this sickness with me. I brought it within me.
And there's a wonderful sense as well of because it is new land. It is, and with all the attendant mysteries and everything, and they have. Sorry,
it's racist as all fuck. I just want to say that because I was praising Lukundu there. It is an incredible commentary on imperialism, etc. It's also racist as all fuck. Sorry,
right,
I just wanted to put
that. Disclaimer. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Elliot, go ahead.
Yeah, it's that all this new land they're in, and all the mysteries of the new land, and the schematics that they use, even down to you almost sense that with Pops, with Michael, that it's he's the logic he finds through the whole situation is almost to see himself as Job. And there's that moment in that wonderful scene where she challenges him, and the fluctuation in the argument, how she challenges him, where she finds the chink, and that they don't make it explicit, which is actually to its credit, but you almost sense that the next thing she's going to say is, "You're not Job." That is, and actually what that is an act of hubris. And then, of course, leading to his scene at the end, near the end, where he just has that moment where he just speaks to God directly, and it's so raw, and it's without any of the kind of protocols that you'd expect him to adopt, and he's at his most human at that point. He's dropped. The need for that almost that schematic, really. It's such a strong moment.
Yeah, the ceremony is gone.
Scene. Yeah, I love that she actually calls him hypocrite, which of course is we use the word colloquially, but it's a biblical reference, and it was a word that was applied to Puritans. I mean, the word Puritan itself is a pejorative term that was applied to them by their enemies, and hypocrite was another. They called themselves the saints and the elect and shit like that. But to call a daughter to scream that at her father, that's serious shit.
There.
Yeah, but of course,
in that patriarchal system is almost unthinkable, isn't it?
It's an incredibly sophisticated understanding of what patriarchy is. I was kind of brushing up for this by watching some lectures on YouTube, and there's a bit where there's a lecture given by an Oxbridge professor talking about the witch trials, etc. And he says, well, you can't just say this is patriarchal repression because lots of the accusations came from women, and you just you just want to find the nearest wall and beat your head to a bloody pulp.
This film
seriously
deals with that. This film deals with that in some of its rawest moments between mother and a daughter.
Right.
Exactly. Because
my
this
God.
film
And the
is
daughter knowing that
incredibly...
she's already exiled and she can be exiled again.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this film is an incredibly sophisticated portrayal of patriarchy, and I don't think it does it from any kind of agenda. It's just trying to honestly put the reality on screen.
It's not a screed.
It ends up it just ends up portraying patriarchy because it's trying to honestly portray these people's world.
Right.
And it's an incredibly sophisticated portrayal, because the problem with William with regards to patriarchy is that it has forced him into a role that he's not happy with and he's not suited for. It's not, patriarchy isn't that the father is this bad, frowning, authoritarian bully. Sure, there was loads of them like that, but at least as much of the problem was what patriarchy did to men who weren't actually suited for that alien, inhuman system. That's William, isn't it?
You don't need to be an Austrian psychoanalyst to realize when he goes out into the forest with a fuck off great big gun and it backfires in his face. What it's we're talking about fears of failing masculinity, fears of impotence. I can't grow my food, as George was saying earlier. Basically, the only thing I seem to be able to control is to chop and stack wood.
Yeah. Which Thomasin, ruthlessly puts her finger on, because she is. I think Thomasin is very like him in many respects, but she's a lot more aware.
Yeah,
she's a lot smarter.
Yeah, she is phenomenally smarter than he is.
Yeah, there's definitely a cross-gender kinship. You feel like Caleb and Kate are closer to each other, and Thomasin and William are closer to each other, which is one of the things that happens. But she and of course it's because of her position in the family. She has in these sorts of power dynamics, you often have a better view of what's going on from lower down.
Right.
Again, there's a lovely line from Douglas Adams where he's talking about the electric monk sat on the horse, and he says, it's difficult to be sat on 24 hours a day by another creature without forming opinions about it.
Dirk gently, I love it.
On the other hand, it's perfectly possible to sit 24 hours a day on top of another creature and never think about it at all.
Right. You're seeing the sickness from within the belly of the beast, aren't you? As it's slowly digesting you.
But that crossover as well between Thomasin and William, because I don't know if I'm right, because I've only seen it once, but aren't they the only two we see actually pray alone as well? I mean, I know her first lines are a confession to God, aren't they? I've disobeyed my parents. I played on the Sabbath, and are they the only ones we actually see?
Kate spends a lot of time talking to God in bed after Samuel disappears.
Yeah,
right. Okay.
I'm not sure that quite qualifies as prayer, though. It's more like grieving, isn't it? It's more like private grieving, but it takes the form of prayer because, of course, everything did in their
everything would. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And as for the twins, a very honest portrayal of children.
Yeah.
Just children being children in all
little
of
shits,
their perversity. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it is a thing with twins as well. Twins can get this sort of dynamic where, because there's two of them, they kind of reinforce and egg each other on. And because if they do everything together and everything they do that's bad, they both do, it sort of magnifies the problem of discipline for the parent.
Yeah, it also creates this sort of like homogenous culture around them, doesn't it, where they are insulated from everything else. And that is definitely these characters. They seem to be able to do things and to get away with things that no one else in the family ever would conceive of.
Well, this is the realization that Thomasin has, and I think if we're going to, which I think is the correct way to interpret this, is that she does realize that this children's game with the twins, I mean, with Black Phillip making up all the songs and everything, turns out to be real. It's real,
right? But he actually is talking to them. Yeah.
It's fascinating that context completely changes how people view something, because the twins don't bother to hide the fact that, as far as they're concerned, they are in verbal communication with a fucking great black ram. Right. They just talk about that all the way through the film, and nobody thinks anything about it. Mercy is afraid of Thomasin when Thomasin tells her that she's a witch, despite the fact that textually we can only conclude by this point Mercy is already chatting away with Satan.
Quite happily.
Right. Yeah,
literally the price of butter.
When she proclaims herself, when she does proclaim herself the Witch of the Woods, she's almost correct.
Yeah,
there's a truthfulness to that.
These people profoundly believed in predestination. As I say, it was already decided, and you discovered your fate as you lived. You lived as well as you could, as Christian in life as you could. But if it had already been decided that you were damned, then that was that.
That was the end of it.
And it would probably seem to one of these people that Thomasin is just predestined. Unless it's that God is allowing her to be tested because she's the best of them. That could be the other explanation. But again, nothing happens that isn't God's will. So if she was, if this happens, then it was always going to happen.
Yeah.
Which is a profoundly alien viewpoint to us, because we love, in our worldview, in the modern world, we love to tell ourselves that there's free will and everything's open, and you choose your life, etc. And rather a childish, naive lie in many respects.
Either that, or we err on the side of nihilism, and nothing really matters, and there is no pattern or choice or anything.
Yeah.
Well, it is. You have a certain amount of freedom, but not in the circumstances of your own choosing. Isn't it? I mean, that's the closest. There's all these little traps and.
Well, that's another wonderful thing. It's another wonderful thing that films and works like The Witch do. It actually enjoins you to consider what forces and assumptions and ideologies are at work on you. What will be regarded as absurd and obscene in 10 or 20 years to come.
Yeah, and the way that predestination works as well, and how we, even in sort of modern writing and modern critique on, how it's been absorbed, often correctly. I mean, thinking just in terms of the category of witches, that, Thomasin looked at a certain way. Certainly if we're going to look at this, as we can't help, because we're aware of feminist writing and stuff like people like Dworkin has written that all women are witches. That's the category. So Thomasin is always going to be a witch. It's not just in terms of her predestiny within the mythology that the film is riffing on. That she's a young woman. I mean, the sexual politics building up around her is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
With regards to every single other character, it's like just by living and breathing as a young woman,
right?
She is seen as fucking up so many lives.
The tensions between her and the mother, between her and Caleb, her and the father, the children. And she is at the center of it, isn't she? Just because she is a young woman. Not because of anything she does.
Love the parallel when Caleb ends up in the woods and and he meets the witch. Of course, presents herself in conventionally beautiful, apart from the arm. But of course it's that. Oh well, it's not the poor guy, is it? I mean, look how he's been tempted, and it's playing with that in such a sophisticated way. This film.
Yeah.
And it's this repeated maneuver where, as I say, it just puts that worldview faithfully, as far as is possible, on the screen for you to just deal with, because our modern instincts in response to stuff like this are almost to look for the redemptive reading or the liberatory reading or the radical reading,
and I think
or whatever.
That's where I said earlier is the difficulty is.
It's not that it's not there, because what it's doing is it's putting historical beliefs, historically, real ideology on screen. And, our sort of radical determinment of those ideas and those and analysis of those ideas, that's based on reality too. So putting it on the screen, it is there for us to reread. But even so, that is an act. That is something.
But I think that is the real interesting tension of this film, is because on some level, the people involved, even in making the film, know that inability to completely disentangle ourselves from our own milieu, our own era, is going to be that. So we're going to be trying to look at this through two lenses, simultaneously. But that's the film's actually its greatest strength, is because we're going to be, this is a world where all this is authentic. This takes place because these people believe it takes place. But at the same time, you as the modern 21st century viewers are not going to be able to do those things. And that kind of, you know, butting up against it is its potency.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh my God, this damn film is sort of so full of wrinkles.
That's where
some of the wrinkles are coming from me, and they're just purely in the film. These are other texts.
This is where it's where the analytical friction is. It's where it comes from and where meaning develops. You know, and it's so rich. It's so textured with that.
It's such a. I mean, we were talking about how it's almost a physical experience. Certainly for me, it was watching this. Is, you know, it's somatic. It's physical. It's intensely stimulating, and I think it is that kind of that feeling of being directly engaged with. You know, there's so much stuff that's just it might be good, it might be fine, but it just plays out in front of you. And
then that's it. You get up and you leave. And for me, I mean, you know, it may sound snobbish to be honest, but for me, if a work does that, it's failed.
Well, certainly horror has, because
it's
horror
failed.
just that seems to me like the whole point of horror is to kind of you know, cause you to have a physical and therefore an emotional reaction, because you can't actually separate physicality and emotion, and or to haunt you in some way, to get inside your head and still be there when, you know, you press stop, etc. So horror certainly has failed as an art form if it doesn't do it. But that thing you were talking about before, Elliot, like that is I mean, I absolutely agree with you. And the scene that makes me think of is the scene where Thomasin tries to frighten Mercy, where she does the, you know, I'm the witch of the woods thing, because you have, certainly I did watching it, you have two equally strong, equally profound and completely incompatible emotional reactions to that simultaneously, because I felt, you know, it's great. There's part of you that's relishing it. You're thinking not just that she's getting a bit of revenge on this frankly obnoxious child.
Yes.
But also that there is, you know, Thomasin is enjoying it. There is a sense in which you are watching her, you know, finding some power, claiming some power through the identity of the witch, through the persona of the witch. She's kind of reclaiming some power and some autonomy and some agency, and every sort of modern 21st century good lefty you know, shred of you wants to sort of reach out to that and grab it and enjoy it. But of course, because of the actual context, which has been drawn so realistically and viscerally up to now, there's another part of you just as urgently saying, shut up, Thomasin,
stop it. Yes, you are damning. Yeah, you are damning yourself here.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It is very satisfying, though. I must admit, it is very satisfying.
There's another bit I want to talk about, which is the scene where Thomasin eavesdrops on William and Kate, which has just struck me, actually. William and Kate. She eavesdrops on them talking about they'll go back to the settlement and they'll basically, you know, they'll give Thomasin to another family. To be their servant or char girl or whatever.
Which again throws light on that final scene. You know, I mean, you know, this predestination is that it doesn't matter what kind of contract. And this is where I, you know, that point you just made about, you know, the good liberal lefty in each of us to go, well, I don't know, she ends up with a better contract. The other thing was she was going to be, I don't know, put on trial, burnt, end up with another family and another kind of servitude. Whatever servitude she's in now, or she's in at the end of the film. I mean, it's probably the romantic in me. I'm just thinking, God, how bad.
I agree, and I think it is deliberately ambiguous. Like, I mean, there are all sorts of ways they could have played that, and while the very end is ominous and terrifying, etc., it isn't necessarily doom laden. There is something celebratory about it. There is something.
The final. The final.
She's obviously enjoying herself.
And the final scene.
And she is
final
flying.
shots.
Right.
it really surprised me, because I thought they were going to fade to black and then into the credits with her just walking towards
Into
the
the
forest.
woods,
I
right.
thought that was it, and then it was like, oh, we're getting this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the best possible way, I wasn't sure how I felt about it, and I thought, well, that's it. It's working its magic then, because I don't know what to make of this scene. It's bound up with all sorts of fascinating clashes and contradictions.
But not all bargains and contracts, or not even all sort of positions of servitude or submission are necessarily grim. Some are some are nice and shiny.
Some people get to be the head footman. And then no, absolutely,
But I love that scene with the eavesdropping, because it tells you so much about. I mean, it's got a class dynamic to it, doesn't it? Because these are. You feel like these are the kinds of people in the plantation, if they'd stayed in the plantation, who would have been quite low down the ladder, the social ladder, and you feel like it's, I'm sure it is an ideological point of pride, to use that double-edged word that gets used a lot by and about William, for him, but it's also a gambit for not just independence, but thereby a raise of status, isn't it? If they leave the plantation, then they leave their set and fixed social status, which you get the feeling is quite low.
Right.
And if he makes it as an independent farmer, then his social status is going to rise enormously. He's going to have taken some land. He'll be a landowner. He'll be an independent farmer, etc., etc. At that point, when it looks like that's going to work, Thomason's future is, maybe in a few years' time, they go back to the settlement and William's a big success, and Thomason's looking at marrying the son of, one of the town bigwigs or something. And that conversation that she listens to, that is William and Kate, and thereby also by secondhand Thomason realizing, she's going to be scrubbing.
It's failed.
Scrubbing the floor.
The project has failed. And,
that's right. I'm going to be working for somebody else, and she's going to be working for another family, etc.
It's a tacit acknowledgement, really, of the moribund status, isn't it? I mean, on one level, there's a lot of complex motivations going on as to why they want Thomasin away. The mother obviously has very complex emotions towards her, but one of them is there is some hope in Thomasin. She is still a young woman. She could still come out of this okay if she goes elsewhere, away from us.
Well, and if William's gamble, and it's kind of the entire settler colonial gamble in Cameo, isn't it? You walk out into the wilderness. Again, we talked about this, the forest as the quintessential locus of American Gothic, because it's this symbol of sort of settlement in the middle of nowhere, and the place that is tamed and taken over.
Well, he says it, doesn't he?
Of the new civilization. Yeah,
he says it himself. He says, "This land will not consume us; we will conquer it." But
if it works, then he's a landowner, he's a farmer, his kids marry up, they do well, etc. He's got status. Maybe Caleb's the governor of the colony one day or something like that. No, it's not going to work. No. Back to the working class for you. And the fact that is such a huge thing. There is a class motivation, a material motivation underlying the religious split, etc. And the fact that those are the stakes. To me, that's that is profoundly about the failure of the radical egalitarian strain within Puritanism, that we were talking about, Anabaptism. And so it was a form of radical utopian.
Well, this is where as well, just as the silver cup fascinates me, because the silver cup is loaded with meanings, because you get this, the sense of it possibly being a symbol of avarice, but it is also a symbol of the older religion. Catholicism.
Yes.
And I'm wondering very strongly what Kate's past was. When she were a girl, because the blood of Christ and so on, and but also silver being the anathema to the devil, and the silver cup disappearing and then being returned, and there's a cluster of things going around. Around that. I think it's one of those things where when I on repeat viewings of the film, I might be able to make some more lucid arguments about. But there's so much going on with that silver.
It's a bit. it's a bit Shakespearean, isn't it? It's a bit sort of pre-Reformation meets the post-Reformation. It's the symbol of the old way, and it's taken and commodified. And it's commodified as much by the devil as it is by William, actually, which is another sign to me that they're kind of part of the same, different aspects of the same system, because of course they are, because what this film is doing is it's putting those beliefs on screen, and those beliefs were the beliefs in the devil and Satan, witches and so on. They were an integral part of this ideology. They even said so themselves. They said, the existence of the devil, the existence of witches, that's part of God's plan. It's proof of God's existence, etc., etc. Yeah.
It's always the case that wherever there's a monster, there's a miracle, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was pondering on that silver cup there. There is a lot bound up there, isn't there? There's a lot you could read into it. The fact that it belongs to the wife, I mean, you could even go down a sort of Dan Brown route with it, that it is sort of like a symbol of femininity, of motherhood, I suppose.
If you wanted to make a criticism of the film, you could say it does the silver cup does kind of sit there waving and saying, "Look at me, I'm a symbol."
Yeah. I suppose there is that, but it's at the same time it's part of what you were talking about earlier, guys, where it is a painterly film. It not only has a sort of artistic set of influences on it, but the way it's created, it is just laden with symbols throughout. The way it's framed, you could take frames from this film, blow them up, frame them, and put them on your wall.
I think there are certain things that kind of just can't help being symbolic, because of how human brains work. Right. We turn things into symbols. So if you find something sufficiently abstract and present it in the right way, the human brain just kind of instinctively goes, right, I need to turn that into a symbol.
I need to start madly interpreting this.
Yeah.
I need to go. What's the cryptologist's name from the Da Vinci Code? Herbert Langdon, is it?
Oh, beautiful Bobby Langdon.
Oh my god. No, let's not go down that route.
But I was asking George earlier, because I don't really know much about Eggers' background, except that other than, I mean, he's responsible for the script as well. So, it's a very literary script. Obviously, is
loads of the dialogue is drawn directly from primary sources.
Apparently, it is almost verbatim from primary sources.
But then he has a production design background as well, which I guess is very much there, as you say, not only in some of the symbolism that's freighted in, but the obvious stills that you go, oh, well, there's a Goya, there's a Vermeer, there's this, there's that, the other. Yeah. But even obviously a kind of a very strong cinematic awareness. This is a film very like Barry Lyndon insofar as he uses just natural light and candlelight, and he has the correct technology to be able to forego anything that looks too like it's coming in from a more modern world.
Right.
But I don't know if you know anything more about him, Jack, because he seems a bit of an enigma as well.
I know very little. As I said, I know very little about the way he works as a director. All I can infer from the work of his that I've seen, I would assume that he's kind of the Kubrickian school, in the sense that everything is very tightly controlled and very deliberate.
He also seems to be of the John Huston school, where he kind of rejects any attempt to talk to him about what his films mean.
Right.
Anybody sort of asks him questions about themes or meaning or anything, apparently he just responds very non-committally, like, well, I just wanted to make a film.
Oh, like David Lynch does, essentially.
Yeah,
it's just like,
I'm after that. But, I kind of appreciate, it's...
absolutely.
As you do it, you don't want to... You've already made the damn film. The last thing you want to do is sort of trying to... dictate meanings to the audience on top of it. I make it, you then got to explain shit.
I kind of appreciate that element. I really do. Yeah. Especially given the types of films that he makes, which are heavily laden with freighted with implied meaning.
Yeah. I really must revisit The Lighthouse, because I've watched it.
Lighthouse.
I know you love it, and I came away from it kind of less than impressed, but I came away from it thinking it was a bit muddled and pretentious and sort of deliberately obscure and stuff like that. But I obviously need to go back to it because this is only the third time I've seen The Witch. I think this is another one of those things that I deliberately don't watch very often because I don't want to overexpose myself. But if anything, I have enjoyed it and appreciated it and been affected by it more every time I've watched it.
Yeah,
so I
definitely.
think obviously I need to give The Lighthouse another chance.
Well, what I find with The Lighthouse is it's consistently more funny than I ever expected it to be. It makes me laugh in ways I never... It shocked me to my core when I first watched it. Because, again, it's another film that's marketed as though it's going to be a horror film. A sort of psychological horror film. And it's so... Well, it is that. There are certainly elements of that, but it's also bloody funny.
Yeah. He does well to survive this kind of... mismarketing as well, because I mean, you could think of 100 films that have been absolute disasters simply because they've been poorly marketed and being in the wrong genre or whatever. So, I mean, I can understand maybe with The Lighthouse because he's got a couple of big names in there, but with The Witch, these are really, really good jobbing actors, with a couple of newbies. So he does rather well considering.
And this was his breakout hit, wasn't it? I mean, I don't know what he's done before, but this was the one that put him on the map.
Yeah. I seem to remember that it came along during that period where there was a bit of a cultural fashion for what you might call sort of artsy or thoughtful horror films, which again, I don't like that sort of narrative because I think some of the most interesting and thoughtful and artistically brilliant movies and novels for that matter in the horror genre are among those that sort of respectable critics would consider just worthless trash.
Absolutely true.
But
yes.
Even so, the same critics will sometimes say, "Oh, well, yes, but I like this one because it's about things." Whereas,
this one gets a pass, yeah.
Yeah, like Dracula's not about anything, obviously, but this one I like, because it's about things. So that there was a trend there, wasn't there, where they were coming quite thick and fast.
Yeah, there was the Babadook, and then I think from the Babadook you had quite a few turning up as a result.
And I have to say, a lot of them I found pretty underwhelming. Like I famously disliked the Babadook.
Of course,
very much.
yes.
And I wasn't as overwhelmed by It Follows as everybody else seems to be. And I think, yes, The Witch came along at just the right moment when the critics were open to it because they were on that sort of jag of saying, oh, it's another one of those good horror films that's actually about things as opposed to those shitty ones that I'm too clever to like.
I must admit, I've always really
not The Witch's fault.
Yeah, I've always really appreciated like Mark Commode's criticism for that because he really does champion the sort of punkish horror.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't seem to have much pretensions in that regard. It's like, the down and dirty made in kitchen sink studios stuff can be as good and as significant as Kubrick's The Shining or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
I'm trying to think of an example, but
stuff like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, obviously,
Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an incredibly freighted, thoughtful, interesting piece. Yeah,
Blair Witch Project. I mean, Blair Witch Project.
It still has a shot in it that I'm not sure how they did. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is damn good going for what was basically a glorified student.
I was going to say, considering
Dawn of the Dead.
Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, that's an amazing film. That is artistically rich by any by any way of measuring these things that I would respect. That is an artistically rich, serious piece of work.
Culturally sanctioned criteria, shall we call it?
Excellent. Yes.
I mean, a lot of like Dario Argento's films have that schlocky feeling about them, but they're gorgeous. They're absolutely beautiful.
I recently rewatched the original Suspiria, and it's demented trash, but it's brilliant.
Oh my god, it's crazy bonkers, isn't it? It is just like,
but it is so it's own hermetically sealed world.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's like there's nothing like this.
Nope, there is
I mean,
not.
it's completely out there on its own.
Totally demented. Well, any film that can make a sincere horror sequence of a young woman just walking through an airport and getting a taxi, well done.
Yeah, and
well
by the
done.
way, I thought this as well on my recent rewatch. Kubrick ripped loads of that off. Like loads of these sort of wine angle shots of interiors and concentration on the ends of long corridors and slow tracking shots and stuff that's in The Shining. He ripped that off from Dario Argento.
Take from the street and elevate to high art. That's the idea, isn't it?
So, I mean, criticisms. This film is open to the criticism, of course, that it promulgates the idea that, there were actually loads of witches out there, which you could argue is pretty tasteless, given that, the witch trials cost the lives of 50 to 60,000 people who were essentially, completely innocent and horribly murdered. I don't find that a particularly compelling criticism myself, but you could say something like, well, take the same textural approach to QAnon and just make a movie that just straight on, or the blood libel against the Jews or whatever, and just straight on, just objectively puts in front of the camera as reality the claims of a different, mass murdering conspiracy theory, and see how you like that.
Or more, maybe more poignantly, take the claims of like gender criticals and make that into a film.
Oh God, yeah, because that, of course, is its own paranoid mythology.
Right,
yeah,
absolutely.
Totally,
it's totally its own cult at this point, and of course, trans women are absolutely the present day witches, right?
Yeah,
absolutely, they are. Yeah, it's a fair point. It's a fair point.
I think it's the distance in time, isn't it?
I think that's one certainly thing. But I also, as I said, I mean, again, I've only watched it the one time, and I feel that maybe that might work against me as well. But there's just these odd things about this film, which is where the literal, and I do agree with you that this is a reflection of the absolute beliefs at the time, just presented. But when you get to the edges of that representation, it gets fuzzy. I mean, there are times where it's like, am I dealing with a reliable narrator now? I think I am, but there's very subtle shifts in the film. I mean, there's, even the very end sequence. And again, I don't wish to be reductive about it or anything, but the mother is dead. Everyone's dead, and she goes off to her room and she puts her head on her arms. I mean, I don't know how, whether the end of the film is wish fulfillment, an attempt to escape from the inevitable forces that or it is actuality, the actuality as someone in her position, and from that culture will understand it. So I think that there's a certain amount of I think we can be apologists for it on the accusation you've mentioned, if only because it does break down a bit the more you think about it.
Right.
The more you sort of think about a scene happening which has a supernatural content, very often it's only one person it's happening to, or there's conjecture, or I don't know. It's a tricky one. Even Caleb's experience, I mean, I don't know. There's still a sense that think that the frame is a little bit fuzzy. It's a little bit broken up.
What you said about when she goes and puts her head down reminded me of Arthur Fleck going climbing into the fridge.
Yes, of course. Yeah. It's a similar symbol, isn't it? It's that symbol of almost completely giving up.
Yeah. I think. I don't think you can actually say, contrary to what I've been saying throughout this entire episode, you can't actually say that it just puts the Puritan worldview on the screen as reality, because if it did that, it wouldn't portray the family the way it does, it? Would it? Because the way the family is written, it is it is a brutally honest portrayal of a family with jealousies and neuroses and anxieties and disappointments and misunderstandings and stuff like that. And the Puritan worldview, I mean, obviously individual people understood their own situation, but the official Puritan worldview, in the same way that the existence of witches was, so to speak, an official worldview, it wouldn't really have allowed for that kind of probing into the family malfunction, would it?
Yes, the form their dialogue takes might have a ring of authenticity to it, but the content, but the fact they even go there,
right? The actual interactions, certainly the way Thomasin talks to both her mother and her father, probably wouldn't have happened.
No.
Certainly not with seriously violent repercussions.
But that, again, it's one of the fascinations with any film that reaches honestly back into the past, as this film does, is that tension, because you are watching it going, well, if there were a similar situation as indeed, how are people really talking to each other in that time? And then that just haunts you.
It really
like
does,
that,
doesn't it?
It's almost like a negative photograph. It's like we're seeing the photograph that represents, but there's a negative underneath it, and you're thinking, oh gosh, how would these situations really play out? Because these are situations you can absolutely believe in. The suspicion of a witch in the family, all these things. But my God, how would they actually? What is the distance between people? And you're left being haunted by that.
Well, because of your experience, because of our experience of media that we experience now, that attempts to portray eras that we grew up through, like the 1980s, for example, and the degree to which they get it wrong.
Well, yes. I mean, when we did Ghostwatch, is a perfect example of it.
Right.
The fact that as I said in that episode, any attempt. And all drama cannot help but be heightened.
Yeah.
But in a sense, you could make the claim all drama is melodrama. It can't help it. Everything is telescoped, it's focused down, it's exaggerated, it's distorted in order to be able to create that turbulence. And I think I have said before, I think it's a mistake to define drama as being turbulence. People do. I don't agree with it, but there is certainly turmoil is part of the makeup of dramatic fiction. So you've just got this one extra. But I think the beauty of the film, it's a similar sort of thing on screen as I mentioned this when I was just chatting with George at the beginning. It's a similar sort of thing that the TV series Deadwood pulled, that having this very stylized heightened dialogue pulled from actual sources. Again, it performs that trick of it's the truth within truth. That deeper. It gets at something else.
Yeah, it's very similitude. It's very similitude we're looking for. It's not documentary.
No, but it's very potently realized in scenes such as when William and Thomasin are having that. That big argument which is a turn in the plot as well.
Yeah, right.
And then, which is fascinating then in juxtaposition with the argument between Catherine and Thomasin, which follows, which is almost in modern speech patterns, almost in much more sculpted down, and we've been sort of prepared for that by the use of language in the bulk of the film. So when that turns up, this moment of which does feel like a sort of shard of real stark naturalism in the thing, we're just utterly prepared for it.
And it's also because everything else is breaking down as well. Like the family's breaking down, their individual minds are breaking down. So yes, the language is breaking down as well.
Yeah, and then for the telescoping of time between then and now, therefore breaks down. It's then it just feels like you're watching an argument that could be carrying on 3 doors away. It's because it's about also a very basic thing. But the religiosity it's there, it's supporting it. But this is an argument about pure jealousy and feelings of distrust.
It's the tensions between a mother and a daughter, under patriarchy.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, the film director can't actually hop in a time machine and
of course,
film a film a fly-on-the-wall documentary with an actual Puritan family in the wilderness, in 1630 or whatever.
And
so
if they
anything
could,
like this is bound.
What the hell did I pay my $9.99 for then?
Even if they could, what would that be? It would probably be very boring and very inert, because that would be real life, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be narrative. It would be real life.
Yeah.
It'd be domestic and boring. And
by definition, no matter how much effort is made to present something, and again, we've talked about this before, realism. Reality as ideology, no matter how much effort is made to present something as real as possible, it is ultimately a work of art and a work of the creative imagination, and we wouldn't want it any other way, because that's what we're here for. So it is not trying to say, this is how it was. Do you remember when the Passion of the Christ was originally released, and there was this ridiculous story that was circulated about the Pope watching it and turning to Mel Gibson and saying, "This is how it was." I mean, firstly, bollocks. No, of course it's not. And it's, this isn't trying to, Mel Gibson probably was, but this isn't trying to say this is how it was. It's asking the questions. It's saying, to what if you could get in a time machine and go back and talk to these people, how much common ground would you have with them, and how alien would they seem? They would obviously be both. They would be human beings, comprehensible to you, and they would also be incredibly different and incredibly alien. And that's one of the questions that this is navigating. And it's
bad enough in the present with my own neighbors.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think this is a work of art of great stature, precisely because it has that questioning attitude to it.
And also, unlike The Passion of the Christ, it's not a work of out and out pornography.
Well, yeah. I haven't seen Passion of the Christ.
It's sadistic. I mean, it is absolute. It revels, and I mean like luridly and almost sexually in its violence. It loves the blood and the pain.
I quite believe you. Yeah, I quite believe you. I've seen enough clips to know that it's...
Forget Hostel, forget all the pornography you can think of. This, it adores its violence. It adores its pain and blood. And
it really wants to get across to you how bad the Jews are, I think.
That's very consistent with a certain worldview of a certain director.
Absolutely, yes, that is the point. That is absolutely the point.
Which, by the way, the people in this film would have absolutely agreed with. But
absolutely they would. My God. Absolutely they would.
Loads of this comes from these anti-Semitic ideas. The witches' Sabbath and the stealing of babies. It all comes from these anti-Semitic ideas originally.
Yeah, absolutely it does.
But again, it's a bit queasy to then. There is a queasiness to it to just put it there on screen. But again, it's because it's questioning, and also I think there's a sense in which, as far as I know, we're all WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, living in Euro-American culture. There's a sense in which, to us, this is the deep magic. This is one of the foundational cultural myths of our, that goes to make up our brains.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think one of the
good or ill.
The strength of this film is that somehow it's managed to find a tone or something where it certainly didn't come across to me. As I say, watching it for the first time, I wasn't really aware of the context. I was saying to George earlier, I'm such a Johnny-come-lately to things. I didn't actually really know that in horror circles that this was from a period where there was a sort of endeavour to make the kind of intellectual horror film or something that would pass muster with the critics. And yet I must admit, with this film, I didn't feel as though there were any... pretensions in that respect. Clearly they wanted to make a good piece of work, and a work that is informed with some very obvious artistic touchstones. But if anything, there was something about its smallness that I thought was actually would stop me interpreting it as being a sort of an art horror or an intellectual horror. It didn't. I wouldn't want to cross into that.
No, I wouldn't want to impute thinking like that to Eggers or Ari Aster, actually. Or I think it was just one of those things where a few of them came along at once, and it created a kind of a critical trend, and maybe some studios were going, they're buying these clever horror films. Let's commission one.
Gave it a sort of legitimacy.
That was definitely the feeling in critical circles. This would have certainly been listed alongside The Babadook and It Follows and all those others that were coming at it around the same time.
And those you mentioned, I think the accusation fits.
I think the difference is ego, to be perfectly honest. I mean, this film is so beautifully shorn of that. It is a sincere effort to communicate something.
Well, if it wasn't for the fact that I sort of knew something about the context, and if it wasn't for the fact that there's something in the look of it, but if anything, there's a great deal about it that almost feels like a small scale British film. It's a sort of small scale British film on a bit of a budget.
It's
like it's what a field in England would have looked like if it had more money and an American studio got hold of it. But
that's a great film as well. A Field in England.
Absolutely fantastic. I'm just again one of the most terrifying. I mean, particularly when you sort of read about John Dee and you read about things like Christopher Hill's The World Turned Upside Down, and then you see the image of him staring up at that black sun. I mean, my God, the blood chills. And it was but there is it sort of, and I think it suits the kind of film it is. It's sort of floating between states, really. It's not quite an art house horror movie. It's not quite a low budget, down and dirty film. It's not quite a British independent film like Field in England. It's sort of floating around and in its own space a bit. It's sort of maybe touching those a little bit, brushing up against them. But I think a great deal of its power, just subjectively, just for me, is the fact that it just the joy of watching something that, for all its cinematic dimensions and everything, felt so like a piece of theatre. Back when I remember, when theatre was doing good stuff. Although which is starting to feel quite a long time ago.
I agree with you. Although there are some coups of cinema, it's very well crafted. I mean, just the editing.
Yeah.
And that cinematographer, I looked him up just before, and this is like his second film.
I know, right?
And you think, well, my God, your cinematography seems so assured and so loaded with an awareness of the history.
That's it.
I really was struck by the editing this time as well, because it just felt. It just felt the rhythm of the editing just felt perfect. It did, and that's a rare thing because unfortunately, I mean, there seems to be a
holding scenes. It's
bliss. But not. Yes, I agree, but not too long either, because there's a fashion of extremes. I feel at the moment where there's very maybe not quite to the level of that it reached after the Bourne movie started coming out, where the editing just became so ridiculously frenetic that.
Oh my God, there was a period, wasn't there, where you just sat there at the cinema going, sit still.
Yeah.
For God's sake, just be still.
Yeah. But even so, that's past, thankfully. But even so, there is still a kind of it's almost like a house style for Hollywood stuff is very, very quick editing. And the other end of it almost feels like a kind of automatic reaction for people who kind of, I'm making an artistic film. So, you sit there sometimes watching these films and you think, cut. Enough. The shots lasted long enough now. Whereas I just on a temporal level, every shot in this feels like it lasts as long as it needs to. It gives you the visual information, and then
isn't it only something like about 85 minutes as well? I mean, isn't the running time actually quite?
It's quite short.
I was going to say it's not a massively long film.
Yeah, which is
it gets on with it. It doesn't muck about.
It gets on with it, and yet it doesn't rush it. It pulls a real trick.
There is an exquisite lack of redundancy here. It's incredible. Like on a technical level, it's just incredible. The camera movements. I mean, the cinematographer just understands why certain camera movements exist. What they communicate. It's just stunning. The grammar of filmmaking that goes on. It is like Don't Look Now in that regard,
And I think because a lot of the horror is in the content, it is in the character interactions, it is in the situations. But when they actually go for the pure cinematic horror of a sudden image, or they're very interesting, because on one level you'd think them far too obvious, and yet every single one lands. When Caleb meets the witch and the hand comes in, it works. When the more traditional image of the witch at the cow drinking the it works. And there's a part of me which is slightly in awe of how they pulled off these things, because we should be a bit too used to them.
Even the single jump scare works beautifully, which is of course Black Phillip ramming into William. It's absolutely brilliant. It is absolutely wonderful.
Also, the way they almost stretch it into a kind of absurdity, but an absurdity where it becomes, you're almost afraid to laugh.
Yeah.
I mean, when the witch, when Black Phillip, butts against, that's one. The image of the hair. I mean, I remember watching the image of the hair, and part of me, being, a puerile adolescent in a middle-aged man's body, wanted to go, "It is the rabbit," but I because I was somewhat chilled by it, And similarly, at the end, with the sort of Goya pastiche, that scene should be utterly ridiculous, and actually, it is on the cusp of, and yet it works. It lands, and I'm not actually sure, even with all my media awareness and everything, how they are pulling off some of these scenes.
I think the film has prepared the way for that image. That
I think
final
it must
image.
be that. It must.
If you just got that
totally
out of
into
context.
The universe.
If you just got that last image out of context, the witch's Sabbath, it would be a bit like, this is somebody's rather cheesy deviant art image or something. The film has led you there, and it's built up the credibility of the threat and the world at every stage.
It can only be that, because
there's also the incredible sound design. I have to say that's a huge part of it.
Yeah. I mean, even the decisions such as, yes, it must be something to do with the way that you're absorbed into the way this is going to play out, regardless. Because the scene where they have Caleb lifting towards the camera in that moment of bliss, in the hands of someone, I just think, oh, that's a bit much.
Yeah,
but there's no point where he makes bold choices, and yet I don't think there was any point where I went, oh, come on, that's
it doesn't spill over into melodrama, does it?
I love the way this film just sort of plonks itself down in front of you and says, "Here I am, deal with it. Take it or leave it."
Yeah.
It is very uncompromising, and sometimes I think works of art that come out like that, very individual and risky, but ultimately successful, I think there probably is just the necessity at some point for the people behind it to just say, look, are we doing this or are we not doing it? Because if we're doing it, we've got to fucking do it.
Right.
And just go balls to the wall and see if it works at the end, and a lot of the time it doesn't, but this time it
just hits. There's a weird kind of cinema alchemy happening here, isn't there, where everything comes together and everything works. It's rare. It's really rare, and it's almost like an example of witchcraft or miracles in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah, you can almost imagine, a film director selling his soul in return for making one perfect film.
A Faustian film director, absolutely.
Oh boy.
Well, I think that's a good discussion. Thank you ever so much.
Yeah,
amazing
thank
stuff.
you for giving me the head. I mean, it was a film, as I say, I nearly forgot about. It was in my slush pile.
Wow.
And it had been there for years. So thank you for sort of reintroducing me to the fact that this film existed.
And for the opportunity to rewatch it, because it is just, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Physically affecting. Yeah. There's not many movies I can say that about.
There are not many. I really love.
My other half said that. Funnily enough, she said that you really feel this.
Yeah. Do
you have to spend half an hour after it finishes unclenching.
Yes. Yeah. Films that are, particularly horror films, that are violent and aggressive towards their audience. I love that.